puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. I'm happy to say we're no longer doing that Book of Mormon stuff. That Mormon stuff is out of the way, but we're still plodding through this tome of absurdity. Welcome, team.
Hello.
Yeah, it's gonna be a while. This is a very large tome.
Well, and we keep talking about the details of it as if we aren't just trying to plow through the damn thing.
Right.
Yeah, I got an email from somebody. We were talking just before we started recording about the Fatima miracle, and I needed to point out that somebody had asked me about this this miracle that went on in Portugal in like 1907 or whatever it was, where reportedly 70,000 people saw the sun dance in the sky. Mm-hmm. And this same person, when I tried to tell him that this has to be an atmospheric condition, that's all it can be, when I tried to explain to him why the sun itself cannot have been, taken all its mass and go this way at this ridiculous speed, and then suddenly reverse to go to this other direction at this ridiculous speed. Let's just take the physics out of that. And let's also remember that this was only visible in one tiny little village in Portugal, not the rest of the planet. Nobody else saw this. So if they saw anything at all, if Madonna existed and predicted anything, if any prophet predicted that this event was going to happen to these 70,000 people actually saw it, then clearly Madonna knew that it was a regional specific illusion created by an atmospheric effect. It would not be the sun actually dancing around. And the guy had a meltdown back at me. That was the response. Wherein he said of this team, of y'all, he said that absolutely everything you say about the Bible is wrong. All of you.
Oh, man, I made a mistake studying for a decade. Damn.
I know. And I mean, look at Kip coming and actually, looking at, translating the words himself, studying the Hebrew to that point. Clearly, we're all just pulling this out of our ass. I didn't spend decades studying this from 6 different angles within the faith. No. It's all monkeys.
Yeah, and the problem he specified with me was that I don't want to believe, as if that's a problem.
Yeah.
I don't want to believe in Santa Claus either. That doesn't mean Santa Claus is real. Anyway,
you don't want his glory washing over you.
At least Santa only requires milk and cookies, not lifelong obedience and fear of thought crime.
To borrow from Dr. Joshua Bowen, we just want to sin. That's it.
Yeah. Arn, I don't know what happened from pre-show to now, but your microphone, you sound like you're somewhere in the back of the room. I don't know if
his mic was always like that, or it's been like that for a while, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
My microphone?
No, Arn's.
Yeah, Arn's. The thing is, I think I noticed that on his last stream, or one of his last streams too.
Yeah. That might help.
There we go.
There you go.
That's that works.
Yeah, it actually kind of was over there.
Wow, good job.
Kind of was.
Yeah, that's better.
Get right in there.
All right, and welcome back, Dr. Kip. Always good to have you on. That's why I had to mention the Fatima guy. On everything all of us say about the Bible is absolutely wrong. We should ask some wackadoodle, of course, some unknown nobody who never studied anything but believes everything Catholics tell him. And he also tells me that I should not look at secular sources.
No, you
shouldn't. Well, I should only reference Catholic sources.
Well,
that's
you
not part
should
of
be
the right
referencing
model.
primary sources, so the accounts themselves. You can reference those.
Yeah.
And remember that all the accounts are literally and absolutely true in every way. And in no way has any person of faith in the records ever lied or exaggerated or been mistaken. And as evidence of that, I would point you to the religious behavior of all the religious leaders today. Clearly, nothing like that ever happened in faith.
Okay.
He must have confused primary sources with primate sources.
Oh.
Maybe he thought at primary school. Like, if it's not covered in grade up to grade 4, it just doesn't count.
So, got a first comment already. So, Argspid, am I reading that right? Argspid says, observation, modern miracles kind of suck. Obvious
True.
conclusion, God's getting weaker. Great work, everyone. God is really old.
True, yeah.
He is the Ancient of Days.
Yeah, he doesn't
Whoa.
miracle like he used to. He doesn't debate like he's used to.
The thing is, you kind of see that trend in the Bible. It's a classic joke.
Am I the only one who is static or something?
Yeah, I got it too.
I also hearing it. I thought it might have been just me.
Wait, so I guess that must be me for some reason with static.
All right, which one of us is electrocuted?
Okay,
Here's
let's
that
try
other-
it now.
Bitten by,
Is that better?
none of us
Oh.
got bitten by a snake, so no
A
news.
long time ago, it was Lawrence's mic. Maybe it came back for.
Right. Yeah.
little
Is
bit.
that
I think
better?
it's gone now. It's
I'm
Yeah.
going to mute for a moment. Let me know if there's a difference.
I think
it's-
it's gone now.
it's
It
gone
was
now.
me
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
because
Okay.
I didn't
Very
hear
good.
anything, so it's probably me.
Yeah.
Well, good. Always an exciting show when we have to open with tech support.
Anyways, well, the thing is,
Text
you kind of see that
support.
stuff in the Bible itself, right? Because like God first creates the universe, and then He has this huge flood, but then by the end of it, He just raised a guy from the dead. Like really tapering off on the exciting quality of these miracles.
This actually fits very neatly within the model that I've constructed for the biblical history, because the very, once upon a time, El was a young, virile deity who got old and had to be replaced by either Baal or Yahweh
Or Kama Al.
and the next young, virile god, who is now also experiencing these same issues, but it seems he doesn't have someone in line to replace him anymore. That's what
Yeah.
happens. That's what happens with monotheism, people.
So God needs Viagra.
I didn't say
Jesus,
it. I didn't
Jesus
say
needs
it.
Viagra.
That's what I'm here for.
All right.
So-
Well, he's not.
reading
He's
today.
just a guy, right? Like he got replaced by just a guy. That's
Yeah, he did.
So
He was
today we are
strange.
reading number 1 Samuel the 13th.
Yes.
wow, what a mess. Seriously, this chapter.
Especially the first verse.
Yeah, the
is,
first verse is the amount. It's a crazy.
It's
Yeah,
fun, but there's a lot of stuff in here. I'm just like, what the fuck is?
Yeah,
going
yeah.
on?
I went into a very big dive into this verse because a lot of people have a lot of opinions on it. So
Well, let's just do that then, because I want to hear Tomer's commentary on the first verse. Am I reading this right? So Saul was ... years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for ... and 2 years over Israel.
Do you
well,
want to
yeah,
know
in
what
the
the text
NRSV.
actually says?
But the thing is, aren't there?
I have 30 and 40 in the NIV, which I know, but
No, that's not right either.
I mean,
well,
no,
I'm sure.
well, that's
Maybe
because
Tomer's
it's-
version has dash.
No, it doesn't have dash. It does, but the Masoretic text reads: Saul was a year old when he became king, and he reigned on Israel over Israel for 2 years.
Yeah, it's fun.
That seems like a pretty significant departure for the translation I'm looking at.
Yes,
It's
it
like
is because
a year.
It's
a
an
year, 1
yeah.
year.
Yeah.
Like
It could be
Uh,
1 year, or it
yeah.
could be could be a word missing, right?
yeah,
How can there be a word missing?
there could be. I mean, scribal errors and stuff. But I can start the commentary on verse
Does
1.
every Bible include a typo?
Yes.
Not necessarily, but just yeah. I'll start with this. So when reading the Masoretic text of the verse literally, we have Saul was a year old when he became king, and he ruled over Israel for 2 years. Although this reading is preserved by the Vulgate, which reads, Saul was a child of 1 year when he began to reign. They just accept it as it is. Jerome, I guess. Most commentators write that this is impossible, and the meaning of this verse has been debated since antiquity. Most traditional commentators wrote that the event happened on the first year of Saul's reign, which lasted for 2 years. This reading is rejected by Gersonides, who writes that it is unreasonable that he ruled for such a short period given all the events of the book. Abravanel wrote that 2 years have passed between Saul's anointment and David's anointment, as seen in chapter 17. Other ancient sources claim a longer period for Saul's rule. Josephus claims in one place that Saul ruled for 20 years in Antiquities 10:143, but in another he claims 40 years in Antiquities 6:378. Acts 13:21 also claims that Saul reigned for 40 years. Van Staldane-Sulman notes that Josephus' first figure of 20 years is attested by Theophilus of Antioch and Clement of Alexandria, but Eusebius claims a 21-year period. Klein, however, notes Noth's opinion that the 2-year period rule fits Deuteronomistic historians' chronological scheme. Bar-Efrat writes that when looking at expressions in the Bible similar to verse 1, we find that it first reads the king's age when he started ruling, and then the number of years he ruled over Israel. This leads to the hypothesis, given by Spinoza in Tractatus 9:133, that Saul's age was omitted from the verse. While this is supported by some Septuagint manuscripts, which list his age at 30 years, most Septuagint manuscripts omit this verse. Then Klein writes that 30 seems to be a secondary calculation. Tsumura writes that a year old, in Hebrew ben shana, usually denotes the age of a sacrificial animal, as we see in Leviticus 23:18 and Numbers 29:36. And since no numerical 1, quote-unquote, is used here, it may mean either a year old or a certain age. Other readings include, as a 1-year-old child in whom there is no guilt was Saul when he became king, according to Targum. Peshitta reads, when Saul had reigned for a year or 2 in his kingdom over Israel. Robert Alton proposed that the verse is poetic, with a 2 parallel cola. The word ben, age, is an alternative for the preposition min, and so he renders, more than a year had Saul been reigning, even 2 years had he been reigning over Israel. And there is a couple lists. Yeah.
No, so is he saying that that's a Scribal error? That the bet was, the mem was misconstrued as a bet? Is that what he's saying in that instance?
I don't think.
So I'm not, I'm not quite good at the Hebrew portion, but I would think that what it sounds like he's saying is like, how in Greek, like they would use like a as part of like a comparative statement, right? Like they would put one like before the first clause and then one before the second clause. So the it kind of sounds like that's kind of what is being described here. Like, yeah, he was that Saul, like, yeah, he reigned for more than a year, 2 years even. Like it's kind of like the whole x plus 1 thing that we see in later.
There is
like
some,
in the second
there
century.
is some poetic like language like that. There's 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7 things he detests. Kind of a like, I don't know. I could see that flow and vibe in Hebrew text. I'm not sure how appropriate it is here, though.
I should note that Tsumura writes that first of all, Tsumura notes Alton's parallel between the number 1 and 2, but then he writes that since the numeral 1 does not appear here, this is not a good example of numerical parallelism. Yeah, I mean, he takes the expression to be ironic, Tsumura.
That's just okay. That just sounds like a cope. So to me, like, okay, so since many Septuagint manuscripts don't even have this, would it be crazy to think that it's probably not original, that this is like
so I would actually say that this is an instance where I would suggest that the reason the Septuagint manuscript, so many of the Septuagint manuscripts don't have this, is because the text is already just extremely problematic. So I would probably side more on this reflects something original, but also indicates to us that there's a major problem here.
Because it seems like because this is I mean, I don't know how common this formula is exactly, but we've seen similar formulas to this about kingship and how long people reigned over Israel. But like, let's say someone had, like, how actually I don't know if you guys do know this, but like in the New Kingdom in Egypt, they would sell books of the dead, and the thing is they were already pre-made for you, but the part that was never filled in were the names of the deceased. Those would be filled in when you would buy it. So it seems like this is like a formula that hasn't been filled in yet.
Do you think it's possible, thinking of Egypt, that this might be something that was deliberately mangled so that it would be struck from the text because Saul, the favor of God is no longer on Saul, and we're gonna, I don't know, the way they used to, I feel
like they just cut it out of the text, and they just wouldn't copy it.
I feel like what the Septuagint did.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah, I've noted on Discord a paper by Rachel Gilmore and Ian Young called "Saul's 2-year reign in 1 Samuel 13:1." And first, they argue that 2 years is quote not as historically plausible, but as symbolic of Saul's reign, end quote. They note that, quote, several commentators have observed that the damaged or deficient text is ironically appropriate for Saul's deficient kingship, or that 2 years is symbolic for a short period of time, as Tsumura said. They bring evidence to suggest that, quote, a reign of 2 years had the symbolic meaning of a failed kingship and a doomed dynasty, the latter often, but not always, manifested in that the king with the 2-year reign is the last king of dynasty. And they continue and write, the 2-year reign as symbolic of a failed kingship and dynasty is appropriate for Saul, the prototype of a failed northern king. The position of the regnal notice in 1 Samuel 13:1 immediately before Saul's first rejection confirms the plausibility of this symbolic reading. By mentioning the duration of Saul's reign as 2 years, the Masoretic text connects Saul with all the negative connotations associated with that length of reign. Yeah, and
there was interesting.
Yeah, and I also found a Kabbalistic argument given by Van Stade and Sulman. It has even been assumed that the figures 30 for Saul's age and 40 for the years of his reign are Kabbalistic references to the figures 1 and 2 in the Hebrew text. Using the system of Albam, the reader may identify the Aleph, 1, with the Lamed, 30, and the Bet, 2, with the Mem, 40.
All this discussion from scholars, no less, over the dispute of 1 and 2.
Well, you said it was Kabbalistic, right?
Yeah, Kabbalistic.
Yeah, okay. So
clearly the NIV was the Kabbalistic interpretation. Since, it does make somewhat more sense than for a 1-year-old to be standing head and shoulders over everybody else and be anointed king and then lead them into battle.
Kabbalistic interpretations to me are like astrological interpretations.
Yeah, I said more sense, not sense.
Isn't it the typical thing whenever the king is not of age that there's a consort ruling instead, or someone that replaces that? A regent. There you go.
Yeah.
Consort would be like a wife.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, we can't let women rule.
No, a wife or a husband, like a prince consort.
Don't say that in this election.
Prince consort would be like the husband of a queen. So they're not regent, they're just married to the regent. I was wondering if maybe the 1 and 2 thing might something to do with like, so the idea of people, you count the year from when a king becomes king from a specific date. You don't necessarily count it from the day that the actual day they became king. There's like a new year of king. So it could be, for example, that he became king in like the 2nd month of the regnal year. And then so even though it's been already 2 years, he's only in his 1st year of his reign.
Oh, like a new dating system.
Yeah, like, so it was like, it was the 1st year of his reign, even though he had ruled for 2 years. Maybe.
That makes some sense.
Yeah. But it does seem like this whole story, or at least the whole section about Saul, is quite a bit of a mishmash of like different sources and stories. Because we have a lot of like different place names and like we have like the same place is called like 3 different ways. Like there's Gibeah, Givah, Givat Shaul, Givat Benjamin, like Givat Benjamin. Like these are like, I think that they're all the same place, but they have like it's named 4 different ways. So I wonder if it's like different sources or something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing is, you're absolutely right. So for these upcoming chapters, it was initially independent from the chapters that we just got done reading. So at least according to most of the scholars that I've read, yeah. So we're looking at a totally different thing. Like in the first part, right? And we saw this in the last chapter, I think specifically. Like there's one of the last chapters. There's this connection to Mizpah, right? And I'm not sure if that pops up in these next few chapters here. The connection to Mizpah.
I don't think it is.
So so that is like one piece of evidence to say like these were 2 initially separate stories that were later put together.
Okay, well, maybe we should start reading the chapter.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, who's going to do that?
How about our special guest, Dr. Kip?
We're reading 2 Samuel 13, right?
Oh,
First
shut
Samuel.
All right.
I Samuel.
All right. Sure. So Saul was 1 year old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel for 2 years. Saul I'm reading from the 1985 Jewish Publication Society.
Me too.
Translation. Oh, nice. Okay. Saul picked 3,000 Israelites, of whom 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the troops he sent back to their homes. Jonathan struck down the Philistines' prefect in Gibeah, and the Philistines heard about it. Saul had the ram's horn sounded throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." When all Israel heard that Saul had struck down the Philistine prefect, and that Israel had incurred the wrath of the Philistines, all the people rallied to Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines, in turn, gathered to attack Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and troops as numerous as the sands of the seashore. They marched up and encamped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, for the troops were hard pressed, the people hid in caves, among thorns, among rocks, in tunnels, and in cisterns. Some Hebrews crossed the Jordan to the territory of Gad and Gilead, or maybe just the territory of Gad and Gilead. Saul was still at Gilgal, and the rest of the people rallied to him in alarm. He waited 7 days, the time that Samuel had set. But when Samuel failed to come to Gilgal, and the people began to scatter, Saul said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the sacrifice of well-being." And he presented the burnt offering. He had just finished presenting the burnt offering when Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to meet him and welcome him. But Samuel said, "What have you done?" Saul replied, "I saw the people leaving me and scattering. You had not come at the appointed time, and the Philistines had gathered at Michmash. I thought the Philistines would march down against me at Gilgal before I had entreated Yahweh. So I forced myself to present the burnt offering." Samuel answered Saul, "You acted foolishly in not keeping the commandments that Yahweh your God laid upon you. Otherwise, Yahweh would have established your dynasty over Israel forever. But now your dynasty will not endure. Yahweh will seek out a man after his own heart, and Yahweh will appoint him ruler over his people, because you did not abide by what Yahweh had commanded you." Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. Saul numbered the troops who remained with him, about 600 strong. Saul and his son Jonathan and the troops who remained with them stayed in Geba of Benjamin, while the Philistines were encamped at Michmash. The raiders came out of the Philistines' camp in 3 columns. One column headed for the Ophrah road that leads to the district of Shual. Another column headed for the Beth Horon road, and the third column headed for the border road that overlooks the valley of Zivoim towards the desert. No smith was to be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines were afraid that the Hebrews would make swords or spears. So all the Israelites had to go down to the Philistines to have their plowshares and mattocks, axes, and coulters sharpened. The charge for sharpening was a pim particle for plowshares, mattocks, 3-pronged forks, and axes, and for setting the goads. Thus, on the day of the battle, no sword or spear was to be found in the possession of any of the troops with Saul and Jonathan. Only Saul and Jonathan had them. Now the Philistine garrison had marched out to the pass of Michmash.
All right, first question I have for this is that so many times we see that God has a plan, but it depends on what some human does. And when some human doesn't do what God needed that human to do, well, then God gets upset and visits a curse down on everybody. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. Now I have to change my divine plan.
Well, this is coming from Samuel, right? Samuel's mad about it because his big crime, Saul's big crime, is that he didn't wait for the high priest. He didn't wait for the right guy to do the sacrifice. Instead, he did the sacrifice. I mean, throughout the Deuteronomic history, we see people making sacrifices that they shouldn't make. My favorite one is going to be in Kings, where they actually sacrifice to another god. I think it's, what is it, in 1st or 2nd Kings? I think it's 1 Kings 10. Where they actually, or maybe 2 Kings 10, where they actually sacrifice to another god, and that was seen as fine. They totally looked over it, but definitely not something that you'd think of something you should be allowed to do. But the big crime, of course, here was not waiting for the priest to do it, because that was the only person that was allowed to. But
was he the high priest or just?
Well, I mean, he was, the man of God, right? But you'd have to wait.
He was the prophet, yeah.
Yeah, like he would, like Saul would not be the guy that's allowed to do this.
Yeah,
but that's the thing.
Yeah,
at that time in history, in geography, it was like the king had a spiritual leadership role, and there was a real balance of power fighting it out for the priest to maintain some of that exclusively, so that they could keep the grounding of their power. So the king would be considered as, a steward of the people under the gods, perhaps, but the priests have to be like, no, this shit, only we can do this shit, or you'll anger the god and everything will go to hell. So you see that dynamic play out many times. The Aten, that was part of the reason the Aten dynasty was so suppressed in Egypt, was because he tried to take the religious power from the priests and entirely put it on the pharaoh, who quite frankly had enough to do. Yeah, so
and the priests don't have anything else to do than to make up shit and pretend to be professors of whatever they made up.
Well, the thing is, even with Saul doing the sacrifice, he was still he'd still acknowledge Samuel as a prophet, right?
Oh yeah,
like he has not taken that spot.
It's only because Samuel was late.
Yeah, he should have
Yeah,
been
just
on
been
time.
on time.
Yeah, I don't think the issue was that he shouldn't have brought a sacrifice because he's not a priest. I think at least the rabbis kind of were like looking at all of these different stories of different characters bringing sacrifices and stuff. They seem to either assumed or like backfilled it and said like when the tabernacle wasn't in a set place, then like anyone could bring a sacrifice on a high place. But I think the issue was more like a prophet says something that becomes a commandment which you can't disobey. So if the prophet tells you, the king, that you must wait for him, you have to wait for him.
And the point that I want,
saying what he said rather than breaking a rule.
the point that I want you guys to address is, I mean, I hear from Christians all the fucking time about the hundreds of prophecies that were fulfilled when virtually none of those even count as prophecies. But here we have so many instances, like I just pointed out, where God's plan does not see the future of what some guy is going to do. And so God has to change his mind. So, well, you know, I had set this up for you, but now you changed it. So now I have to visit you people with a curse or a punishment, or I have to come and personally kill you until your wife throws a foreskin at my feet, and then I have to change my mind again because yet again I didn't see the future coming.
Well, you see, Aaron, that's just free will. You know, God loves us so much that he gave us free will.
Look, Aaron,
and something else too is that we know more or less how the Mosaic law goes, and kings don't offer sacrifices. The high priest does. So I think part of me, this is also just trying to make a point. Like, you know, this is not how kingship's going to be. The king does not offer sacrifices. And, you know, here's sort of like Nadab and Abihu, that story where I think they were all of the priestly order, but they just offered the incense at the wrong time and they were stricken
or in
death.
the wrong
It's
place.
like, really? So God is sort of like seems to be improvising and then teaching through it.
Hey, you know what?
But
I don't think we're going to come up with a rational argument for copium.
But there are special dispensations, right? I mean, in 1 Kings 8, the king and all of Israel with him sacrificed sacrifices before Yahweh. I mean, hell, in 2 Kings chapter 23, Josiah just sacrifices priests. Right?
He does. He does do that.
So, you know.
And I guess it might depend on like the type of sacrifice too. Like, you know, if we're talking about, let's say, like the temple inauguration, right? Like that's massive. Like Solomon had piles and piles of animals, right? But I would think that would be, you know, a different type of sacrifice than like something
Dark
like
Matter
this
25 video with the stacked all the way up to the sky.
I mean,
like,
yeah, he's not
shit.
wrong. Like, that's pretty accurately as how it was described. It was a lot.
Like how would it have been observed like in the post-exilic times with a king offering a sacrifice? Would that have been appropriate?
Well, they wouldn't have had king in post-exilic times.
I think we're forgetting.
But that's one of the big issues, right? By the time one of the big issues of the Hasmonean kingdom is this relationship between the priest, the temple, and political power. You know, are they kings in everything but name, right?
I think we're all forgetting that we observe how religious thinking works, and we have all observed this. It's very simple. If what you do works out, then obviously God told you to do that, and you did it right. And if what you do doesn't work out, then obviously you fucked up something and God's pissed at you.
Yeah, that was a way that they kind of dealt with things not going their way. Well, it must have been your own fault. So
there's always something you can decide. They picked up something with their left hand instead of their right. Obviously, they insulted God, and now everyone has to die.
Right, yeah. One of the other things I wanted to point out was the weird introduction of Jonathan. He just because like in 13:2 there, It's just like, yeah, 1,000 were with Jonathan. And we don't really have a proper introduction to him until later in the chapter, where it says that Jonathan was Saul's son, and then I think later in the next chapter we get like a proper introductory formula. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul. So that's like, more of a proper introduction. But it is really interesting how, like, we get to a point very quickly where where Saul isn't like, some young new king on the scene. No, now he's like a dude with a son, with a grown son who is leading people in battle. So kind of a bit of a time skip in a way. And I think that introduction was just very interesting to me. Kind of sus introduction.
Got a couple comments to read. Matt White says, Aaron, every Bible is missing the epithet that ends. Any similarity between characters in this book and any real person, living or dead, is a crying shame. Oh, thank you for that. And then Sable Eagle says, we're talking about the omnipresent, omniscient God who knows every thought everyone shall have before they have it, who wandered around the garden looking for Adam and not knowing why.
The comment continues.
Yeah, and not knowing why he was hiding, then surprised himself by regretting killing almost all life in the flood that he didn't know in advance that he was going to decide to send, right? Of course, he can't plan ahead. Yeah, that was one of my complaints too.
Well, remember, the whole omniscient, omnipresent God thing, super anachronistic. They did not have that view of God.
It's important
he'll come up later.
That. It's important that we reiterate that enough for these people who want to brag about all the fulfilled prophecies, that God didn't know what the fuck until men decided that God knew that.
Yeah, that's painfully obvious, but what is theology if not the pursuit of ignoring the painfully obvious? But
then
sorry, go ahead. Please read the next one.
No, please finish.
I actually was going to ask you, please read the Ben One Eye comment.
Okay. Ben One Eye offers $25, thank you, and says Samuel.
No, that's a Romanian lei.
What?
Romanian lei. That's the type. That's not dollars.
That's
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
RON.
Romanian lay. Says Samuel should have just said, a priest is never late, Saul, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
Yeah, but then that would require Samuel to have had a sense of humor and not be
it does come across like he did arrive precisely when he meant to.
It does.
He comes across like he wanted to come late, or God told him to come late so that he would be testing him. Like, come late.
I wish I could just decide to come late.
He was like, "Oh, David, he exists. I don't like Saul anymore. How do I get rid of Saul? Oh, I'll have to concoct a plan to like make him do something wrong."
Yeah.
Then Trevor.
Sorry, go ahead.
Nope. You.
Okay, well, I was just going to say Saul pisses off God in two ways: by trying to make God happy and by not killing quite enough women and children.
No, he killed all the women and children.
Didn't he keep alive a few for
no,
the
he
Lord,
kept alive. He kept alive the best of like the sheep and the cows
and the oxen to offer to the Lord
and the king.
I
mean, like that's what he says, right? So, and maybe,
killing them 3 hours later for God is obviously far worse than just
but let's
killing
be
them all now.
and clearly let's be clear. The problem in that story is never that Saul killed too many women and children.
Oh no, he didn't kill enough of everything.
The rest of the stuff,
more killing.
Exactly.
He should have done more.
Anyways,
needed just a few more widows and orphans, and what a bad.
No, he killed them all. Right? He killed them all.
I know, but it wasn't enough.
It was, yeah.
Well, if he kept the women alive, that would be seen as immoral. If he'd kept the children and the women alive, that would have been seen as doubly immoral, you know, because of the implication there. But he kept the sheep alive, so he still has options.
He's a sheep lover.
Only a few, but
I feel like one could always make a different case. You know, like Saul, if I could play devil's advocate, right? Saul felt like Yahweh really needed his sacrifice and that there's a timeline and he wanted to be, you know, consistent with it and showing his reliance on this deity, because he could have just turned around and said, I don't need Yahweh. Who cares? Never mind, you know, Samuel, he's not going to show up. I'll just do my own thing, right?
Listen, yeah, I am sympathetic to this view. And so if you look at the Misha Stele, which is also called the Moabite stone, it tells the story of the King Misha in campaigns against Israel, and he offers up a city. I don't remember which one offhand now. Might have been Nob. No. Anyways, he offers up a city as a cherem for a cherem to Chemosh. It's fragmentary, right? So part of this inscription is missing, but it says he's speaking in the first person, and he says, I offered up, you know, this city for a cherem offering. I killed all this number of women, children, men, and everything. And then it breaks off, and it says, and I dragged blank something broken off before Ashtoreth Chemosh, the consort of Chemosh, right? So what is that he dragged before Ashtoreth Chemosh? And it breaks off again, but it seems like he has held back something, right, to bring to the temple of Ashtoreth Chemosh to offer as a special offering. So I mean, if you look at a text like that and you look at what Saul did, maybe this is just what he's doing, right? This is what he says he's doing. He says he held this stuff back so that he could make a special offering to Yahweh. But you know, I think it, and it's painted as, you know, this is a cowardly act because he listened to the people, right? He was afraid of them. So but you know, you got to read between the lines on some of this stuff because it's late propaganda.
On all of this stuff. Yeah, no, I agree. And like,
First
what did he drag before the god? Almost certainly either the opposing king, because we humiliate your leader before our god, or the god of that particular town, if they had a different god. You could similarly drag its idol before it. Be humbled before our god. We have conquered you. Your god is kneeling at our god's feet, kind of a thing. Like, we've discussed both of those options before, so symbolically that's in line with the times.
My god has a bigger dick than your god.
Oh man, the Jews would have fared so much better if they had left their god for one with an actual bigger dick and not such insecurity issues.
So Trevor and Wright says, since this story in the text is somewhat historical, can you suggest what's historical pertaining to this passage?
This one, basically nothing. This one is entirely politically motivated. So we have no like external evidence for any of this. So basically nothing.
I will say that if Saul was a real historical character, he almost certainly fought someone at some time, and there were probably offerings involved. So
sure, yeah.
Okay. And then we got a comment from Juju Dude, who offers £10 and says, when exactly did God become omniscient, and does he know this?
Well, that is quite funny.
I think I'm hearing static again. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I am hearing it too.
Well, become dynamic then.
Okay, is it gone?
Yeah,
that must be me.
Yeah,
okay, yeah. I have no idea what's actually causing that. So when it comes to when he became omniscient, I think the closest we get in the Old Testament is in Ecclesiastes, where it says that I think that's the one where he says that he knew you in your womb, right? Or was that a different?
No, that's Psalms.
That's Psalms.
That's
But even
Psalms.
so, I think I would actually say I don't think there's ever a point when
I think it's the
he
closest, is what I said.
actually does. Yeah, maybe that's the closest. But if you read the text carefully, it does not ever clearly present an omniscient deity, nor a singular deity in terms of like a strict monotheistic picture that you get, by the Roman period.
Yeah,
Well, then,
in
I have to ask then.
in the New Testament, I know that that God is described as Almighty, right? They use Pantocrator, right? So like,
Yeah.
so like that would be, but I don't remember if it says anything about.
But that's
knowledge.
that's a Greek. That's actually a Greek technical term, right?
Right, yeah.
Drawn from. So it doesn't exclude. But are you speaking to the omniscience?
Yeah, I'm speaking to like when
yeah.
we talk about the omni features. Yeah.
I feel like these are ideas that get infiltrated from like the Hellenistic period.
Yeah, it's divine cannibalism. Time. I keep saying this.
Yeah. Oh, that is a perfect phrase for it. I've been describing it so many ways. Divine
I took that from someone, and I
ideal.
forget who it was. Maybe it was Francesca or someone else. But I remember I got it from someone else. I just don't remember who.
It's the perfect term. But I have to say, like, in terms of because we've discussed how the theology changes through all the times, not only that these texts were written, but later edited and incorporated and all the rest of it. The beginnings of it, I would say, came from after the exile and the exposure, particularly to Persian Zoroastrianism, because Ahura Mazda is a much grander, all-encompassing God concept. And then you take that and try and mesh it with your own God and say, well, maybe our exile was the plan all along because 4D chess, and we just have to believe in the plan, which is not a form of copium. We see it all today. And then, so then the God, sort of blows up into this much grander, and, maybe you aren't fully omniscient, but you're much, much grander on a cosmic scale, ideologically at that point. And from there, it's not very far to say, well, maybe he just knows everything.
Yeah, like early Israelite religion and like early Israelite religion or early Judaism, whatever term you want to put on it, it's often not really talked about in outside of scholarly circles, but they're very syncretic. They were very good at being syncretic, and then that continued on into the first few centuries CE. Like that wasn't like this taboo thing. Like now when people consider these faiths to be syncretic, or at least now when you talk to like a normie about it or something, just some random everyday Christian who doesn't like really look at this stuff too deeply, they're gonna be like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. Like it's kind of like a dirty word, but it's not. Like it's just what happened with many religions.
Well, those that know this, who are Christian, usually become either atheists or Episcopalians, because you cannot take the theology seriously in the sort of fundamentalist evangelical way if you know that much about the origin of the God concept. You can at best take it as like a way of understanding the world and broadly and yada yada yada, but the God that Matt Dillahunty and I were raised with is not possible. It's just not.
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to the next chapter?
I have commentary.
Which I have conveniently forgotten.
Yes, you did. Okay. Yeah, so
I know that you began your commentary.
I did, because that verse is very charged. Okay, I'll start on verse 2. Garsiel notes that Saul's army is much too small to face against the Philistines, and that Saul encamped at Mount Ephraim in a relatively sparse area, in close proximity near the Philistine prefect. This leads him to hypothesize that Saul was a vassal of the Philistines, who was enthroned on their behalf and by their approval. He writes, quote, "According to this hypothesis, the Philistines limited the number of his troops and made Saul settle for 3,000 of them. Therefore, Saul sent the rest of the volunteers to their homes. The Philistines also determined the number of encampments, and therefore the army was split into only 2 encampments. By Philistine command, the camps were settled at Mount Ephraim and near the Philistine prefect, so the Philistines could keep an eye on what is done in the Israelite army. Moreover, the Philistines raised serious restrictions on the iron weaponry industry in Israel, verses 19 through 22. I just included this because I thought it was an interesting hypothesis, although I couldn't find any others who can corroborate this, or at least support
the other opinion seems to be that the 3,000 is like the first standing army of the king. So like, you're not going to have a massive army that's like full-time paid to be soldiers. You'd have a small corps, and then everyone else is like reserve. And then, they sound the shofar, and then the people come and they assemble. But 3,000 would have just been like professionals, if that makes sense.
Okay, now on verse 3, let the Hebrews hear. As we noted in 4:6, Hebrews was the term used for the Israelites by foreigners, or by Israelites themselves when they speak with foreigners. This led several commentators to amend the text. Septuagint reads, "The slaves have revolted," reading Avadim, slaves, instead of Ivrim, Hebrews, and Pash'u, revolted, instead of Sham'u, heard. McCarter writes that the Septuagint makes a confusion between the Hebrew letters Dalet and Resh, but favors the Pash'u reading and amends the text to read, "And the Philistines were told the Hebrews have revolted." Saul blew the horn throughout the land. Klein, however, notes Norman Gottwald's opinion that in asking the Hebrews to listen or pay attention, Saul is appealing to a third force, or Apir warriors, who have been serving the Philistines, but are now invited to come over to the Israelite side. Bar-Efrat writes that Saul uses the term Hebrews, quote-unquote, to make Israel rebel against the foreigners who called them by that term. On verse 4, Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost. According to verse 3, Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost, or prefect. Kimchi writes that either those who heard of it thought that Saul attacked him, or that he ordered Jonathan to attack him. Bar-Efrat writes that rumors tend to be inaccurate. The act is attributed to Saul because he is the king and the high commander. Klein proposed that this may be a sign of, quote, the composite character of chapters 13 and 14, end quote, and that these verses belonged to, quote, originally independent traditions, end quote, regarding Saul and Jonathan. Tsumura, however, writes, quote, such a diachronic and tradition historical approach misunderstands the stylistic characteristic of ancient Near Eastern narratives, end quote. Yeah.
So
that
is it
same
possible that there is a an older story where Jonathan was his own character, hero, king, something, and then was incorporated as the son of Saul later?
Yeah, I mean that's totally possible because like the later Jonathan we get kind of has those homosexual undertones with David, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the like at least for the start of David's reign, Jonathan is pretty crucial, I'd say. But it is interesting that he's just kind of thrown in here and then only gets that proper introduction later, which is why I was like, I don't know about this one. This seems kind of
also,
something.
did the ages?
Going on here.
How would the ages work, right? If Saul had reigns for 40 years, and according to some, then Jonathan would be, let's say 20 here. So he would be, he'd be like 60 by the time of. No, I guess we don't actually know when in his reign this is. So it could be near the end of the reign anyway.
Well, comparatively early, it seems, but we're not told whether he was married or had children prior to taking leadership in Israel. So, he was at least technically an adult by that time, I would hope, especially since one of the acts of, divine anointing on him was for them to lead them into battle victoriously. But yeah, like it's not entirely clear.
Yeah,
but he could have had a son already. That's very.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if like the ages of Jonathan and David actually kind of line up or not.
Oh, you're wondering if it was a May-December thing, or?
No, I'm just.
I would have thought that more with Saul.
The traditional story seems to be more that even David was even older than him, but like I don't know. It's interesting. I'm just wondering if the stories kind of match up or not. Maybe it is like it doesn't really make sense if there's a massive difference in the time or whatever.
So are you suggesting that perhaps David was into older guys?
I don't know. I'm just wondering if let's say Saul had this long reign, David turns up at the end as a young boy or a young man, and Jonathan is actually at the beginning of the reign. It doesn't really make sense. Or is
if the reign was long, which at least some interpretations would indicate it wasn't, and also. Like he's a boy when he's first introduced to Saul, which we'll get to with the harp playing and the Goliath thing. But by boy, I mean like he's at least 13. So if Jonathan would have been a bit older than him potentially, but not necessarily absurdly so.
Yeah, because at this point, like he's leading an army. I don't know how old you have to be to lead an army.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, like Saul reigned for quite a while after the introduction of David, if we're just judging by the amount of shit that went down. So
I'm saying it seems that the stories are disjointed because of them being different sources, not because actually the story of Jonathan and David is supposed to be about the same character, Jonathan, who's like in the second year of Saul's, was a swordsman and a hero. Like it doesn't really make. It seems to me that it's implied that there is multiple stories going on.
Yeah, agreed.
Chronology isn't exact. Yeah.
On that same verse, Israel has become obnoxious to the Philistines. Hebrew for obnoxious is niv'ash, the nif'al of the root bet aleph shin, to stink or to smell bad. Rashi and Kimchi wrote that this is an expression of hatred, like a person who detests a smelly thing. Van Stalda and Sulman writes that niv'ash may be a technical term for a political challenge, and if so, the Philistines were challenged by the Israelites with respect to their government over the land, a view which is reflected by the Vulgate, Targum, and Peshitta. Septuagint reads, Israel was put to shame among the Alophiles. Alophiles meaning the Philistines.
Alophiles?
Yeah, that's how the Net's translation has them. As
what does it mean?
It's just the Philistines. It's basically the same term for them.
Never heard of that.
Well, now you do.
Well, it's done.
Yeah.
Okay. In sociology, allophilia is having a positive attitude towards outgroup members.
Yeah, but in the Septuagint, Alophiles are the Philistines. Okay, so on verse 5, 3,000 chariots. The Masoretic text has 30,000 chariots. The 3,000 is from the NIV. While this reading is attested by Vulgate, Targum, and Vaticanus, the Lucianic Recension and Peshitta read 3,000. Klein writes that even with this emendation, the number is still exceedingly large, compared to Sisera, who had only 900 chariots, seen in Judges 4:3. He further writes, the terrain in the vicinity of Michmash is not suitable for large chariot forces in any case. 6,000 charioteers, not horsemen, would be enough for a 2-man crew for each chariot. Such 2-man chariots are known from Egypt, although Yadin has shown that the Philistines had 3-man chariots, as did the Hittites. End quote. Tsumura, however, writes that the Philistines probably needed and possessed more chariots, for they held control over the entire coastal area, through which the Via Maria, the major international road, ran. He also suggested reading 30 units, seeing Elef as a military unit.
Yeah, I think the Septuagint says 3,000, right?
I think so. Yeah, Vaticanus no, the Vaticanus has 30,000, but the Lucenic Recension has 3,000.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be like, I think Steinsaltz says this could be something to do with like 30,000 is the full military unit of chariots, with 6,000 of them being actual horsemen, as opposed to infantry or whatever.
And the fish was this big.
Oh, sorry, it's not Via Maria, it's Via Maris. I had a typo there.
But the
Sorry.
next bit is even more like Mormon style, because it says
Then-
numerous as the sands of the seashore. Like that's like sounds like a Mormon battle scene
I guess.
where the
On
numbers
verse
are just massive. Yeah.
On verse 7, Hebrews. The use of the word for Hebrews, Ivrim, is problematic, as we've seen in verse 3. Tsumura gives one possible interpretation, that these Hebrews were Philistine mercenaries. He writes, however, that it is hard to think of a reason why they, in particular, would have fled clear to the Jordan. Septuagint reads, and those who crossed over crossed the Jordan, end quote. This led some commentators like Wellhausen, Budd, and McCarter to amend the text by removing the word for Hebrews, but others like Stobe and Klein preserved the Masoretic text. There could also be a play on the words Hebrews, Ivrim, and crossed, Avru.
Yeah, I mean, is it that problematic for the Jewish or I guess if it's post-exilic, right? Like authors to refer to the Israelites at the time as Hebrews rather than Israelites.
Yeah, but
Israel.
but consider that Hebrews is like considered a pejorative term usually by foreigners.
Well, it seems to be like an
Odd.
exonym almost for them, but like, I mean, if you're writing a story and you're like, you know, they did this and that, they did that, and then you're using the word Hebrew as like this is what the Philistines called them. Could it just be that the people writing it just didn't even think about the implication of using it from a neutral perspective? I don't know.
It's again, it's a bit
Like
odd
you said, it
because
could just be, like you said, it could be like it just sounds nice together with the word avru, which means to cross.
Yeah, and I think
yeah,
it's weird, right? Because this is really the only place in the text where it's not, because that's it, right? Like it's not attributed to a foreign, like a foreigner speaking. So what the hell?
I mean, there's also the previous verse, yeah.
Right. So it's
I've seen the comments piling up, so maybe.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Okay, let me get to those.
Wow, that's a lot.
All right, so these did pile up a bit.
Yeah,
So
quite a
Trevor
bit.
Wright-
Thanks, Peter.
Trevor and Wright says,
I
when
didn't do
referring
that.
to biblical genealogy, would you suggest that it is remotely similar but has some difference to the Egyptians' kings lists of mythology?
It is pretty similar in quite a few ways. Like the Turin canon, for example, starts with Ra being the first king, or you have this whole generation of gods that are reigning as kings on Earth, and then the next generation is like these spirit kings, and then eventually you get to actual kings. So they keep having this transfer of power, but yeah, it starts off completely mythological, and then it gets to a point where it's like, well, these are historical, like these are historically verifiable kings at a certain point. And there is actually a part in my book about the Turin canon. So,
and then DBK says, bravo Lilith, bringing in some comp with Ahura Mazda / Zoroastrianism. The Heb intro to Zoro mythology was part of what initiated formalization of Abrahamic brand of Semitic mythology.
So I think I know what you're going for there. Although I would say that the roots are still earlier than the Persian period, considering we have texts like Hebrew works that are older than that, like Amos and Hosea.
I've often
could be like-
seen that where supposedly some unnamed scholars have said that much of rabbinic Judaism was inspired by Zoroastrianism, or was more inspired by Zoroastrianism than by any other
rabbinic
that's-
Judaism. Like that's like, let's be clear. Like, are we talking about like medieval Judaism?
No,
No,
the
I
only
mean,
distinction that I know of is that there was a time when Judaism was not monotheistic.
Right.
That would have been long before
Well,
what
it
would be
wouldn't-
termed rabbinic. That had
Yeah.
more to do with the loss of the temple cult. Sorry,
Yeah.
didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say thank you for the comment, and I forgot I was muted. But yeah, they took their own god and some of their own traditions and exaggerated it with the Zoroastrian thinking. It's there's always multiple ingredients in the pot when you make a god. Some would argue too many ingredients in this pot, but.
yes, Second Temple Judaism already would have been monotheistic, really, and quite established.
Yeah.
But it would have had a lot of influence from Persian thought because of that period in exile. But actually, rabbinic Judaism also, because quite a lot of Jews didn't come back with the after the exile, and actually Babylonia became past the Second Temple destruction into like the early 300s, I think, was actually like the major seat of Jewish thought, and like a lot of rabbinic Judaism would have developed there. Like the Talmud, like there would have been like a Talmud, like there's like two versions of the Talmud almost, and the Babylonian one is considered more authoritative. Yeah. So they themselves would have also been inspired by like Persian spirituality and medicine and all these different things. So
and Christianity by that point. Like that's one of the
definitely.
ongoing conversations among rabbinic specialists is that by this time there's a great deal of interaction already. So, and that's sort of what makes Talmud what I think of as rabbinic Judaism is the post temple period, so after 70 basically, right?
Yeah.
And it does one of the things, it does become problematic when trying to pin a lot of this stuff down historically, because the Talmud is already so heavily influenced by a lot of these other things. Does it provide us a clear example, a clear picture of earlier forms of Judaism? But
should I then have said monotheistic Judaism?
Maybe I guess it just depends on what you're talking about, and I'm probably being super pedantic and petty here, but like it's just a really messy, complicated picture.
Yeah.
And
you know what it is? It's acting improv. Yes, and you can never say no. You have to say yes and yes.
It's a lot of that.
Yes,
and
and
a lot of that,
except
right?
it's been going on for 4,000 years, and we can't yes and anymore. It's become this like that. Oh God, that Dragon Age 2. The one of the mages at the end, he like grabs a whole bunch of bodies and welds them onto himself and becomes this horrific monster. It's that. God is that.
Yeah, I think Second Temple Judaism is like the established bit where they have a kind of canon and they have like a system and everything, and it's only like later, like when you get some some of the that the Second Temple Judaism is what influenced Christianity and the Essenes and all of these different factions, but like it's definitely more established and more monotheistic and has a canon at that point, and we have writings from that period. So
and I was going to say too
amend.
that at times it seems like the line between I was going to say that at times the line between monotheism and henotheism can seem a little blurry as well. So let's not forget that.
Yeah, real quick, henotheism. I was led to believe that's a belief where you give credence that everybody's religious belief is true to a point. That was the first way it was described to me.
Other gods exist, but you are only allowed to worship your God. Like
Okay.
you're very much on one team and one team only, but the others are out there, and that's cool. But
that's what Kip was talking about before, when regardless of Isaiah 45, when God says that he's alone and there's none else, that he just means in his own personal pantheon. He's not talking about everybody else's.
Well, Isaiah 45 is also second Isaiah.
Yeah.
So it's already later in that period, yeah.
Okay.
Much later.
That's the weird thing about biblical scholarship. I mean, just you have to think in multiple levels.
Yeah.
Isaiah isn't Isaiah. Isaiah's a
It's a
handful of
pain in the
Isaiahs, and they're all
Isaiah is a handful of Isaiahs. Okay, so Isaiah is broken up into three parts. Yeah. First Isaiah, which may or may not go back to the actual person Isaiah. And then you have Deutero-Isaiah and Trito-Isaiah. So
Which were written at different times, are different scrolls and have different goals, but I would consider that it might have been a prophetic school of Isaiah, started by an Isaiah.
Yeah. So what we have happening is very much, I like to think about it very much like analogous to the way in which the 12 prophets developed, because as far back as we can trace, like the manuscript evidence and the traditions, the 12 so-called minor prophets were always collected together. So it was always a single book. They're small, so it's easy, right?
Yeah, they're always listed as the 12 in canon.
Yeah, exactly. So Isaiah is a little bit like that, where we have this 8th century prophecy, or collection of prophecies, which we know as like chapter 1 through, most scholars say chapter 39 at this point, but I think even the division there, whether it's somewhere between chapter 35 and chapter 40, it's anywhere in there, right? So, but you've got this original collection of prophecies. Isaiah is mentioned like 6 times in them, and then it's appended with this historical narrative, which is basically ripped right out of the Deuteronomistic history, like Second Kings.
Right, from 39.
So it's actually 36 to 39. But then after that, you've got anonymous continuous prophecies. So I like to think of this as just similar to a scroll that contained the 12 prophets. You're just continuing, you're just adding prophecies on that are similar in some respects to the voice that comes through in some of the Isaiah prophecies, like the original Isaiah prophecies. But in the original imagination of these people, these were not like the same book, right? Like they weren't the same. This wasn't stuff that was continued by, it wasn't attributed at first originally or thought of as part of Isaiah. It became subsumed under that rubric over time, but originally was just like, we've got this scroll with the Isaiah prophecies and then these other anonymous prophecies, all in the same manuscript.
But what you guys are overlooking is like every trailer park in Texas has like that one trailer that has a big cross on it, and because that one trailer is a church. And in said church, Isaiah is just one guy who wrote one collection of stuff, and we don't have to know what century that he was. Isn't it so much easier to do like that? You guys are wasting your time, dedicating your lives to scholarship. Just believe what the trailer church told you.
You know what?
Good point.
You know what, Aaron? You sound like a Drake stan who's riffing on Kendrick, because when Kendrick raps, we actually have to think.
How about we
it's
continue
way more
with these
fun
comments,
my way.
Yes, good point. So Matthew K says, wasn't it required that they must be at least married to rule?
I don't think so.
No idea.
The only thing that comes to mind that sounds like that is from the New Testament, where a bishop must be blameless, the husband of but one wife, and blah, 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 blah. That's the only thing I can think of. Although it would be expected for a king to marry and produce heirs, because, dynasty.
Multiple wives would have been expected of a king.
Yeah.
And concubines.
Yeah. Then DBK throws in Lawrence, Isaac, Tomer, Dr. Kip. Merlin turns out to be a
Proto-Celt?
Yeah, Proto-Celt Euro shaman.
Shaman.
Wow.
Okay.
So much Semitic myth turned out to be, I wish people wouldn't write to be, it turned out to be commonly held pi in all caps. Myth derivative.
Proto-Indo-European?
Proto-Indo-European makes sense, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to figure that one out.
Indo-European, yeah.
Yeah, and then please don't write in codes that I don't know. And think Saul might be Uther analog.
But
what do they mean
Semitic,
by Uther?
it's not related.
Father of Arthur.
There's no relation between Semitic and Indo-European languages, though.
Okay, so when they say Uther, they are talking about Pendragon.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
they're talking about the father of Arthur from Sword in the Stone and Lancelot and the Round Table. That's pretty far to draw parallelisms beyond the most basic. Bad king is superseded by divinely chosen good king, which is kind of a pretty broad trope.
I think you would have to wait until the Greeks come before you actually get that Indo-European influence on the.
Right, because they were doing their own things, and they were not. They didn't evolve together in that way.
Unless we're talking about something really basic, tropes that exist before, that are not tied to a specific language.
But then, the issue with that is then you get into that the weirdness of hyperdiffusion, and how just because you have some similar motifs, it doesn't necessarily mean dependency.
We're still human. There's only many things we're going to come up with.
Yeah, and it's to me it sounds more likely that Arthur legends, which would have been written down late during the Christian era, as far as I'm aware,
would be.
We don't actually have I don't think we actually have any pre-Christian Arthur legend writings or anything. It's more likely they would be influenced by the Bible than the other way around.
I am so conditioned. I heard Isaac with a British accent say Arthur, Arthur, and I heard Arthur, Arthur, King of the Britons. Oh yes, oh Lord.
What are you doing now? I'm averting my eyes, oh Lord. Well, don't.
Anyways,
sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. Dara O'Kane, is it possible that the point of the Bible is God saying or learning the Jews are not special or different than others, as he doesn't seem to love or trust his chosen people? Well, he does seem to obsess about them, doesn't he? Because it's all in the Bible. He's always talking about the Jews. He never discusses Australian people. He never discusses the Comanche or Cherokee. I mean, he's very specific about the people he acknowledges.
There's no point to the Bible. It's a collection of all sorts of piles of different literature with many points. So
and the idea of the role of the Jews from God's perspective seems to have evolved over time as well. It could have been very early on, yes, he's the God of they're his people because he is their God, and there are other gods for other peoples, and therefore his only responsibility is to them. And then later on it would have become more to the later idea of this is my nation of priests, and they are my they have to do I've given them a special job to do. That would have been something that probably evolved later. And that's kind of the sort of current Judaism kind of looks at it that perspective, rather than this is a special people and everyone else is evil or whatever. It's not it's not Jews are going to heaven, everyone else is not, right? The sort of idea that modern Judaism holds is more we have a special rule, we have more commandments to follow, and everyone else has only 7 or whatever it is. So it's we chose God to give us the Torah sort of thing, and you were there before you were born, and you told God that you would follow the laws, and okay. Yeah.
Okay, and then we have happy face is the way I can read it here. I don't know what it may have looked like before it was transcribed. But the question is, do you think any of the stories read so far were real or happened?
Some of them probably have some historical roots, like the grain of truth, right? But
Are you talking about like the Tower of Babel being based on the Marduk Ziggurat, something like that?
Well, yeah, closer to that. But even with like Balaam too, right? Like that's that would be like a real person. But like this, the way that he's presented in Numbers 22 would not have been accurate.
It's possible that he was a real character from the Bronze Age, and then the people who wrote the story.
I wouldn't
possible. I'm saying it's possible. I think it's more likely that
he was a prophetic character that was known in the region. If
Not
they
in the Bronze
wrote
Age,
a version of him,
that's what I'm saying.
No.
It's more likely that he was actually from a later date. If he really existed, then he would have a later date, and then he was backdated to be at the time of Moses.
Yeah.
Because I think our only other sources are also Iron Age, but they also, I think, put him back in time. I don't remember.
No,
they don't.
So the way that I personally, I don't know if anyone bothered to listen when I was giving the presentation on that. But the way I did it was like he would have been a real prophet maybe around the 9th or 8th centuries.
Okay. So if he was real, then he would have been like definitely would have been Iron Age, and then the Hebrew text put him in the wrong time. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
retcon what?
I just love. Listen, I just have to say that I love that perhaps the best evidence historical figure from the Bible is Balaam. I think that's amazing.
You mean earliest?
Yeah, and yes, and
that's funny.
Yeah, in terms of this period, in terms of all the pre-exilic stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah, that is hilarious. Given that he's the one who talked to his ass. Yeah.
And then we have Money Bags, who offers $19.99 and says, I grew up in a Christian creationist doomsday cult, and the cult father named me after this book of the Bible. P.S. Finding your channel opened my mind to an entire world of information I never knew existed. Thank you. Two very different messages in there. For the latter, you're welcome, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, my favorite book of the Bible is in fact Moneybags. So
I thought that was only in the Joel Osteen version.
Yeah. Okay, then moving into the next comment, we have DBK, who says, as this mythology was forming, so were the sophisticated philosophies of the Upanishads. Ever wonder if Adam Kadmon theology may have had roots in analog roots this far back? Well, I've actually wondered about that kind of thing because, I mean, there is a story in I think it's Genesis 30, where you have Jacob wrestles God. I hope I'm not misremembering the names. But then you have a story in the Mahabharata where King Arjuna is accompanied by Lord Krishna, and he has to wrestle a lake god. And the lake god does the same kind of cheat move, touching Arjuna in the hollow of the thigh, but Arjuna manages to win the wrestling match anyway. And what I think interesting about that is we have, I mean, it wouldn't have been close proximity at the time, but when you look at it, when you look at a globe today, it looks like close proximity. It looks like the same story being told by two different cultures.
Remember that before we can insist on dependency, we need to be able to provide a historical link, because otherwise it's just pareidolia.
Yeah, and I get,
but we can't.
I'm no fan of speculation either. Yeah, but there's a possibility there.
I do want to apologize. I completely forgot that Persian, like later Persian, would have been our Indo-European. Then in my head I was thinking Babylonian, who were Semitic, at least the Sumerians, whatever. But the not Sumerians. Sumerians is an isolate. Sorry, the Assyrian version, whatever. But the Persian influence definitely would have been Indo-European. So, but I don't think like the core, like, you know, Canaanite gods would have been influenced by Indo-European that much.
It's important to point out here too that even though the book of Genesis is the first book in the Bible, it's really late. Like, you know, I easily Persian, I think, at a minimum. And I think there's layers. There's parts of the book of Genesis that are still being negotiated as late as the Hellenistic period. So, you know, it's
Kip, can I really want to do a show just you and me on that one topic.
On Genesis is fun. And dating Genesis.
I had a conversation about it with Josh that I thought was very rewarding. I would love to do one with you just on that topic, on where you think Genesis came from. Let's please schedule that soon.
Yeah, okay.
Pandora's Pinata, I love that name, offers $5 and says, Isaac doesn't have an accent. That's what English sounds like when spoken properly.
I don't have an accent because my accent is so diffused and like non-specific, and like that Americans think I sound English and English people think I sound American.
Yeah,
perfect.
I think it's because I say my name is Isaac, and so as soon as I say hi, I'm Isaac, they're like, "Oh, are you American?"
Man, I had to talk with an agent on the phone yesterday that kept saying my name Aaron, and I kept spelling it for him and kept correcting them 20 times. He's still fucking saying Aaron. No, not Aaron. Aaron. Stop saying Aaron. The closest I ever I got him to say something close to Iron. No.
You know what? You just have to change your name to Uncle Eero because everyone can pronounce that.
Yeah.
No, a lot of people say Iro, no?
Yeah. Okay, so
the way that I think
now
about
we're
it
ready
is
to move
as
on
if
to the next
No,
chapter.
we're not. We're not actually.
Why?
We're ready
Because
to move
I
on with the rest of
haven't
Thomas'
finished my commentary.
And there's one more comment.
Spent 20 minutes on the question.
I think there's one more comment.
Yep,
Yes,
just popped
there
up.
is.
So Shane McCausland says, how do Christians and Jews reconcile Ezekiel 18:20 and 2 Samuel 12:14? God says the son won't be punished for the father, and God punished the son for the father.
I don't think it's
as I always say.
So
there are no contradictions in the Bible as long as you ignore all the contradictions.
Yeah, so this one is to me this one's fun. I have used this before because we get this whole thing because there are parts of the Bible that do talk about like original sin, or you'll be punished for the sins of your father and whatnot. But then in Ezekiel, it's not. We have to remember Ezekiel is like the odd one out when it comes to the prophets. He was like always the black sheep of the prophetic family. So he's like always standing. There are times where he like directly is like in contradiction with like Jeremiah, for example. I think in Jeremiah it says that that Jeremiah was the only prophet at the time, but Ezekiel was meant to be a contemporary. So it's like, what the hell's going on here? So like, because Ezekiel's of like a very special case kind of prophet, which is why I'm such a fan of Ezekiel.
It's fun because, you know, if they're contemporaries, right? And when you read Jeremiah and Ezekiel together, my God, they would have been, if they ever met each other, they would have been
scrapping in the street.
Like
wigs on the lawn. Just yes. I just think it's so hilarious that you have these two prophetic characters who at the time were claiming that basically he's full of shit and I'm the prophet of God and I'm the one who has it right, and they're saying exactly the same opposite things, and then we have to harmonize them as both being prophets of God, so everyone was right and shut up.
Can I continue?
Yes.
Okay. On verses 7b through 15a, the story is interrupted by a separate account of Samuel's accusation of Saul. Garsiel writes that some scholars assert that this section is a late addition, noting the similarities between this section and chapter 15. For example, Klein notes that Veyola has built a strong case for assigning verses 7b through 15a to a Deuteronomistic redaction, pointing to expressions like a man after his own heart and the connection of the dynastic promise to the keeping of Yahweh's commands. Garsiel, however, takes verses 7a through 15b as organic to this chapter, writing that the narrator builds the contrast between Saul's behavior, who doesn't trust God, and between Jonathan's behavior, who trusts God. Tsumura, based on a discourse analysis of chapter 13 using verbal sequences, writes that chapter 13 is a literary whole, rather than taking verses 7b through 15a as a later redaction.
Is that all of your commentary for 7b through 15?
I mean, yeah, because I didn't want to lengthen it so much because I thought it was a pretty short one, and you know, 2030. But
do we not have commentary from Christians saying, "But Jesus is in here somewhere"?
We do, but that will be in the end.
Okay.
But I do think that the later edition is the more accepted one.
I did. I did. I don't know. I was kind of fascinated by this expression in verse 12 here, right? Where JPS says, "I forced myself to present the burnt offering." I took it upon myself to present the burnt offering. Kind of a weird word there. Oh fuck. Whoops. Sorry guys. But yeah, it's apak. Thank you. Yes. Well, I mean the root is anyways. But yeah, it's fun because this is one that also appears in the Chodayot from Qumran. Also in the Hitpael form, which doesn't mean anything to anybody else but Tomer. But
I kind of know what that means. Kind of.
Oh,
but
awesome.
It doesn't actually change my understanding of anything.
So, but yeah, so like the Chodayot translates it as strengthen themselves or control himself. I don't know. It's just one of those. It's an interesting word to me. It's rare. It's slightly ambiguous as to what it means. So yeah.
I actually have comments for verses 11 through 12. It is unclear what exactly was Saul's sin. Garsiel notes two main interpretations. One, Saul violated Samuel's order to wait for 7 days until he arrives. Saul did wait for 7 days, but he grew impatient to wait for the late prophet. And two, Saul was not allowed to raise the sacrifice instead of Samuel, who was a prophet and a priest. Bar-Efrat, however, writes that it seems more reasonable that Saul sinned by ignoring Samuel's order to wait for him to arrive and inform him about what he shall do, as we see in 10:8. Likewise, Auld writes that even if Samuel's 7 days is being understood literally, the more important part of his earlier command has been to wait for instructions. Tsumura, however, rejects this, since the command in 10:8 was probably over 10 years earlier, and Saul had presumably kept the command. He writes that as the representative of the people, the king should carry out, quote-unquote, God's word, according to 15:11, especially during holy war. The king should be under the control of God's words, and the prophet's role is to intercede and instruct the king and the people. Thus, Saul's sin might have been his failure to acknowledge the prophet's higher role as the divine messenger, and to listen to God's word. This rejection ultimately leads to Saul's total rejection from his throne, 15 verses 11 to 23. On verses 13 to 14, Auld comments, there seems to be no strong reason for considering this short sub-paragraph as additional to its context. If we remove verses 13 to 14, then the remainder of the story has Samuel turn on his heel wordlessly when he has heard Saul's inadequate answer to his briefest of questions, "What have you done?" An unspoken response might have communicated very effectively, but it would have been uncharacteristic of Samuel. Then, since several items of his response are drawn from the royal ideology already in BTH, Book of Two Houses, there is no question of a later writer importing external terminology. The high price demanded as so much earlier in Saul's career for his folly, someone after Yahweh's own heart already sought out as his successor, leaves a question over the divine attribute to David's folly. To develop the analogy with modern employment terms, Saul is told remarkably early in his probationary period that he has been appointed to a post with tenure, but has already demonstrated he is not up to the job. No. On verse 15, then Samuel left Gilgal and went up to Gibeah in Benjamin. It is not clear why it is stated here that Samuel went up to Gibeah of Benjamin, rather than Saul. Septuagint has the following addition, quote, and Samuel arose and departed from Galgala, i.e. Gilgal, on his way, and the rest of the people went up behind Saul to meet behind the people of war, when they were come from Galgala to Gaba of Benjamin, etc. Most modern commentators write that the MT has lost the original text through a long haplography, when a scribe's eye skipped from the first Gilgal to the second, i.e. homo eoteleuton. Tsumura, however, writes, quote, Samuel might have gone up to Gibeah of Benjamin because the southern route, which leads from Gilgal to Gibeah, was the only safe way to the territory of Benjamin now that the Philistine army had occupied the Michmash area, end quote. And finally, verses 19 to 23, Auld comments, contrary to the expectations of some scholars, who know they are dealing here with a narrative that purports to tell of a period in which we know that iron began to be used in the ancient Near East, hence Iron 1, there is no indication in this text that it is the new iron technology that separates Philistines from Israel. Iron, in Hebrew Barzel, is rarely mentioned in Samuel through Kings. It has made only 2 appearances in the Book of Two Houses. Iron tools mentioned at the end of David's victory at Ammonite Rabbah in 2 Samuel 12:31, and the iron horns, quote-unquote, worn by the prophet Zedekiah in 1 Kings 22:11. And we find talk of iron more often in non-synoptic portions of Chronicles, 9 times, than of Samuel through Kings, 6 times. However, the pim, in verse 21, equivalent to 2/3 of a shekel, is often stated to be evidence that this report has originated close to the period that it reports. The one securely dated and inscribed example of this weight belongs to the early monarchic period, end quote. Now, for some of the Christians, so Afachat claims that the events of Saul's and David's lives find striking parallels in the life of Christ.
There's a Christian commentator called Afachat.
Afrahat.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Egyptians?
No. Afachad in Hebrew means nobody, but it's Avrahat.
Abraham.
But is it supposed to be Hebrew or is it?
I think he's Syrian, isn't he?
Syrian, yeah, he was Syrian.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So he was using like Aramaic or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You might have written in Syriac. I think you wrote in Syriac actually.
Is it literally just like by anonymous in Syriac?
Could be playing up the humility a lot.
I have to look it up.
No,
I'm nobody.
Well, maybe there's no connection to the Hebrew. Yeah, just sounds like it.
Yeah. Now Chrysostom writes that remarkably, David attains to New Testament values of clemency while in the Old Dispensation.
Sure, Jan.
Now, and finally, Bede writes that the state of affairs symbolizes the enemy's efforts to prevent the church from putting on the armor of God. Those who went to the Philistine smiths represent those who turned from God's word to earthly teachings. The Israelite lack of arms represent those who, out of laziness, fail to prepare for spiritual battles.
Have y'all? I was gonna ask, have y'all encountered modern Christian interpretations of this larger Saul David cycle.
I mean, Tsumura is modern Christian, right?
Yeah, but probably not as homiletical. Like I grew up, I grew up in an evangelical church. For the first part of my secondary education, I attended like an evangelical college, and I remember taking a class called it was like something like the mandate of leadership, and we had
that sounds familiar.
Yeah,
are we talking about like
Project
so we
like
had a
Saul represents the old covenant and it failed and
so
okay.
This was the textbook that we used was one which basically drew an analog of how to treat Christian leaders, how to treat church leaders, how to exist within this church leadership structure when leadership fails, right? So Saul is the failed leader. David is the successful leader, but in that period when the failed leader still maintains control and power, the teaching is you still have to show deference.
God forbid I should raise my hand against the Lord's anointed.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Right?
Which is
because Saul, right? Look at what look at what a fucking idiot Saul was. But don't you dare.
Because the basis of Christianity and Christian thinking is authority as opposed to reality. And that kind of thinking is exactly why there is such a problem with every kind of abuse of every kind of vulnerable person. Because if you have to maintain respect for the structure of authority, regardless of what goes on, then when your children are molested, you have to shut up and just pray that God will make it right someday. And fuck that.
I had that very same story given to me by my supervisor pastor, the senior pastor, in light of there was this one volunteer leader that had raised some objections as to some things that were happening. And in private, he told me, the pastor, against him. And he said, oh, how dare he, raise a word against, It's just that when I hear that, it's just like it never felt right. It didn't go well in my heart.
Because it's not. It's how evil and cruelty and every kind of vileness is preserved, and it's the time when it is most absolutely necessary to be a rebel and
preserved, justified, defended, excused.
When in actual fact, like from a just a careful read of the text, I just can't help myself from reading especially the Saul stories in his interactions with Samuel, and just going, this poor guy. He doesn't, his leadership foisted on him. He doesn't really want it in the first place, and then in the eyes, he's trying to do, I see a man who's trying to do the right thing, who's sensitive to which you should be, right? You should be sensitive if you're a leader to what the people you are attempting to lead want from you. And this is a lot of what Saul is trying to do, and just keeps getting, blasted for it, right? Samuel's just constantly calling him an idiot. Like,
and for me too, the whole concept of being a leader after God's own heart, like what exactly does that really mean? Like, was Yahweh expecting Saul to know everything? Like, how could he have access to God's heart, whatever that means?
Again, post hoc ergo propter hoc. You pissed me off, so God's mad at you. and you lost the kingdom, so you were always going to, because you did this thing that you shouldn't have done, despite the fact that I never explicitly said you weren't supposed to. So you're a bad king.
So from a much more subversive perspective, there's another way I think you can look at this, where in 1 Samuel chapter 7, chapter 8, Samuel's rejected as a leader, right? By the people, and he's wounded about this. So I think you could look at this as Saul's in Samuel's mind, Saul is a choice in an attempt to continue to hold on to leadership through this guy who's going to just do, because this is the message of the text, right? You need to just do whatever Samuel says and you'll be fine, right? But the problem is that Saul doesn't. So
he starts taking initiative like a leader. What is he thinking?
Yeah.
I agree. I absolutely see that. And it's almost like all the prophets of God and the God that is based off of them are egotistical little narcissists who have bitchy fits whenever anyone criticizes their leadership, and then they insist that God killed everyone and it's not their fault. It's just, this isn't familiar at all.
All right, so chapter 14 is very long.
Yes.
We're not going to be able to do the whole thing. So do we want to split it in half, maybe?
Which is a shame, because we dedicated most of this episode to 13, and I hope we will get to 14.
I'm sure it's my fault.
Well, 14 would be still, pretty long anyways.
So are we wanting to put 14 off a week?
No, surely not. I think we could give it the old college try.
Yeah. Let's.
I don't mind giving it the old college try, but I don't want to split it up. We either do it or we don't.
Yeah, I agree with Aaron. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I mean, I'm happy to read it and get through it if you guys are up to it.
There might be a logical division in it, though.
No, I hate splitting chapters like that.
Oh, okay.
This is very annoying.
All right. So am I reading then?
All right. Let's do it.
Sure.
Okay. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go up to the Philistine garrison on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree that is Migron, and the troops that were with him were about 600 men, along with Ahijah, son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord of Shiloh, carrying an ephod. Now, the people did not know that Jonathan had gone in the pass by which Jonathan tried to go over the Philistine garrison. There was a rocky crag on one side and a rocky crag on the other. The name of one was Bozez, because we name rocky crags now, and the name of the other was Sineh. One crag rose on the north in front of Michmash, and the other on the south in front of Geba, because symbolism. Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will act for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." His armor bearer said to him, "Do all that your mind inclines to. I am with you. As your mind is, so is mine." Then Jonathan said, "Now we will cross over to those men and show ourselves to them. If they say to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand. That will be the sign for us." So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, "Look, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves." the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer, saying, "Come up to us, and we will show you something." Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet with his armor bearer following after him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan and his armor bearer, coming after him, and killed them. Who could have seen that coming? Okay, in that first slaughter, because there's a lot of them to come after this.
Yeah.
Jonathan and his armor bearer killed about 20 men within an area of about a furrow long of an acre of land. There was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among the people. The garrison and even the raiders trembled. The earth quaked, and it became a very great panic. Saul's lookout in Gibeah of Benjamin were watching as the multitude was surging back and forth. Then Saul said to the troops that were with him, "Call the roll and see who has gone from us." When they had called the roll, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark." Which one? "Bring the ark of God here, for at that time the ark of God was with the Israelites." Because I know, because you lost track of where it was in the last chapters. While Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. And Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and went into the battle, and every sword was against the other, so that there was very great confusion. Now, the Hebrews, who previously had been with the Philistines, had gone up with them into the camp, turned and joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, when all the Israelites who had gone into the hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too followed closely after them in the battle. So the Lord gave Israel the victory that day. The battle passed beyond Beth-aven, and the troops with Saul numbered altogether about 10,000 men. The battle spread out over the hill country of Ephraim.
So I do, sorry to interrupt. I think this is a logical place to at least talk about
No,
some
no,
stuff first.
24. I think it's more logical.
This is
If we go,
No?
yeah, no, well,
Okay, I mean, sure, we can read through 24. Okay.
Okay, 24. Now,
oh,
Saul committed a very rash act on that day. He had laid out an oath on the troops, saying, "Cursed be anyone who eats food before it is evening, and I have been avenged on my enemies." So none of the troops tasted food.
which
Yeah.
was
This-
yeah, I think we should have stopped before that, but like,
Because the reason is that in the Masoretic text, at least, it is separated by a stuma. Means that
Oh.
it is the next
Yeah,
section.
but it's also interesting
Okay.
because there's a big difference here between the Septuagint and the Masoretic.
Yeah, there is.
The Masoretic completely skips out the bit about the troops. 10,000 men were with him, and the battle spread into the hill country of Ephraim, and Saul committed a rash act. It just starts with the men of Israel were distressed
Oh, okay.
that day. Yeah,
I hope I
okay,
read that
so-
with the reverence it deserved.
I was thinking
Yeah,
if you
I
really
did like
read it.
your Jonathan voice.
Yeah, I was seeing images of my head of like this like cartoon with you reading the doing the annotation or whatever it's called. Like
So
it
I
really
did
came across like
want
that.
to point out a few things here. So one that was really stood out to me, at least, was the so right after they kill some of these Philistines, and it says here in verse 15. There was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among all the people, the garrison, and even the raiders trembled. The earth quaked, and it became a very great panic. So at least those two last things, they're very commonly seen with what's the word I'm looking for? With theophanies.
Lawrence, you're being static again. Sorry.
Am I? This is so weird. I have no idea why. Is that better?
Hopefully.
Okay. Yeah, I have no idea why.
Probably me. I stood up and my chair squeaked.
No, I still heard no static, so it was probably me, and I don't know why that's happening. That's annoying. I'll have to go back and listen to it to see how it sounds. But either way, yeah. So these.
I'm all for blaming Lawrence, just because.
That's fair. And it became a very great panic. So in those portions, these are often seen with theophanies. Like whenever you have like the presence of God around, these things they're very common, right? It's very common in poetry. It's in Job. It's in other places in Samuel. If you have God showing up somehow, the earth quakes. That's a very common one. Now, the reason that stood out to me is because it's pointed out that the ark was not with him. Instead, it was with the Israelites. Or with the rest of them, right? Like with Saul and his troops. But I think that the reason that's significant to me is because this might have been like written during a time where now because if you can kind of see where it says here, for at that time the ark of God went with the Israelites. So it's being written at a later period, and I think that because of that, they're taking out the importance of the ark or holy objects during the battle. So in my mind, this is kind of this is written during a period where the ark wasn't thought to have like the presence of God, where he didn't necessarily travel with it. Like it was like we kind of get that in other parts of the Bible, right? That the ark, that's his footstool, like that's where he is, that's where his presence is. But in this one, it seems like, while it doesn't say it explicitly, it seems like God's favor is still like, it's somewhere else. He's helping out somewhere else, even though the ark is in a different place. So that is why this section was at least significant to me. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I don't know if any of what I just said makes sense. It made sense in my head.
No, I get what you mean, where the tradition previous had been to invoke the presence of God in battle, specifically by carrying their ark into battle, especially during the, in the incursion into the promised land. This is the God is going for us. We are doing our thing. Go kill everybody. And then, maybe God shoots lightning out of the ark. But in this one, clearly, Joshua is acting on his own. And the
Jonathan.
spirit of Jonathan, sorry. Jonathan is acting on his own, and the spirit of the Lord is with him, and he receives a sign by honestly doing something very stupid. Because if you're going like sneaking up, anyone who's played Assassin's Creed, bear me out on this. If you're sneaking up the tiny hidden crag way to the fortress, to be all subtle and assassin-y, you don't then stand there and be like, hey guys, should I come up and kill you? Yeah, dude, come up and kill us. Like, giving up the.
Also,
it's very much a trope of like, oh, we have to get the go-ahead from God by hearing a certain phrase or seeing some particular thing or whatever. And then, of course, the two of them managed to just rout an entire garrison because God is stabbing.
Yeah, so even though it's not explicitly stated that God is with Jonathan rather than with the ark somewhere else, I feel like because like the earth quaked and became a very great panic, to me that signals the presence of God there. And maybe I'm being anachronistic here. So
I mean, maybe the earthquake could just mean like the people trembled and ran about, making lots of noise.
I totally get that. Yeah. That's entirely plausible. But like whenever, like so many times when we see the phrase "the earth quaked," it's in accordance with the divine theophany, like in Job, for example.
Yeah, and I think it says explicitly as well, like whatever. He caused a confusion, maybe.
They had and it actually in
and the terror from God ensued.
It's the terror from God, right?
Yeah. So it's explicit according to the. What's it called? Not the annotator. who's the voice
Gloucester?
that reads the story.
Yeah,
Oh, narrator.
The narrator, yeah. The voice of the narrator. This is an act of God. But it's still like, it seems strange to me, like, oh, they could say this or they could say this. If they say that, it's a sign from God. Like, it's either like forcing God's hand and being like, well, you have to now choose whether to tell us if you're with us or not. Or it's just like, oh, there's a 50-50 chance of them saying either one. So like, you can't really take it as a sign. You know?
They basically decide for themselves what the sign is going to be. It's
Yeah, people love doing that, honestly.
right.
But it's like, if God didn't want to be with him, he would have to then show a sign that he wasn't with him. He would have to like choose the opposite.
Yeah, there's this part in the Iliad where they're giving sacrifices before they go out to battle, and they're just like, first sacrifice, you know what, there was a sign, but it's not one that I liked. They waited for like a sign that they liked before they go out to battle.
I mean, we also have it with Saul, right? Saul's like, oh, let's get the Urim Thummim out and ask God, like, what should we do? And he's like, well, actually, you know what, the fighting's getting really bad out there. We should just, priests, stay your hand. We don't need your opinion. We're gonna go fight.
We do not have time for your magic sacrifice shit. It's going down. Let's march.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, that's how you have to act in war.
You could see that as a sign of God as well. Like, you see a sign of, you could say it's a sign of God that the people are, that you're only missing 2 people and that they're going, so it's act.
If God didn't want to be with him, he could have just suggested that maybe they see other people.
That would require emotional intelligence. I don't think that's really his forte.
Okay, I'll start on my commentary. First,
about time. What are you holding this show up for?
Yeah, always my fault, of course.
Yeah, we should be in a bit more of a rush. Yeah. Sorry.
On verse 3, Bar-Efrat comments, the information that an ephod-bearing priest is with Saul turns attention to the matter of inquiring of Yahweh, told in verses 18 through 19 and verse 36 forward. But for what reason was the genealogy of that priest, which also includes his uncle's name, Ichabod, brought here? It seems that it intends to connect Achia with the known person from earlier stories, and to create contrasting parallelism between the current war and the war of Ebenezer, which resulted in a huge defeat by the Philistines, the death of Eli's sons, and the capturing of the ark, which the name Ichabod symbolizes, as seen in 421. During the destruction of the Shiloh... Sorry?
No, go ahead.
During the destruction of the Shiloh sanctuary, this ephod was probably saved and was since passed through the priestly family until it arrived to Achia. The nature of the ephod is unknown, but it is clear that it was used by the priests as a tool to inquire God, probably using the Urim and Thummim which were inside of it.
Okay, well, that's what belly fat says, but who cares?
Okay.
Magic 8 balls / chest plate,
Yeah. Like, it's interesting, the whole idea of like taking lots and being like, oh, if we do a raffle, then God has to show his favor and choose someone, right? And it's almost like if a raffle happens, like whoever wins it, that's literally the one that God chose. If you take do a lottery and you do like whose name shall fall out or whatever, like that's literally God showing his hand. It's like, yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I've jumped a bit on that chapter and I got to 14 in an area of about sorry, I skipped one comment.
Yeah, within a space about half a furrow. Oh, okay, you want to go back?
No, verses 6 through 7. Sorry, verses 6 through 7. Auld comments: Jonathan is already a more kingly figure than his father. He has confidence in Yahweh, as we see in verse 6, equal to his name. Yahweh has granted. And when he repeats his call to his armor-bearer, he manifests a soldier's coerced scorn for his opponents. When he dubs the Philistines the uncircumcised in the first words of the author puts in his mouth, he anticipates his dying father, 31:4, and the first and also last words ascribed to him in BTH. And he thereby introduces a theme that we find in the books of Samuel clustered near the beginning. 1 Samuel 14:6, 17:26 and 36, 18:25 and 27, and the end, 1 Samuel 31:4, 2 Samuel 1:20 and 3:14 of Saul's story. We have already noticed how this narrator models himself on the language of BTH. The readiness of Jonathan's armor-bearer to follow his master's heart's wish in 14:7 echoes what Samuel has explained about Yahweh's expectation of Saul's successor in 13:14. Would that Saul shared Yahweh's heart? Question mark. So I jumped a bit to verse 14. In an area of about half an acre, the Hebrew Bible reads, Kebachetzi ma'ana tzemed sadeh. The meaning of this phrase is unclear. Ma'ana seems to refer to a field for plowing, as in Psalms 1293. The term tzemed sadeh has been understood as a pair of oxen, according to Kimchi and Bar-Efrat, or a yoke of field, with yoke, tzemed, referring to a unit of area measurement, according to Tsumura. Vulgate and Targum read, in the space of half an acre of a yoke of oxen in the field. Septuagint reads, with darts and with sling stones and with pebbles of the plain. This reading is favored by McCarter, but he writes that this was a marginal gloss at the end of verse 13, intended to identify the weapons of Jonathan's weapon bearer in view of 13 verses 19 to 22. He writes that the Masoretic text is plainly corrupt. Peshitta reads, like stonemasons, like plowmen in the field.
Yeah. Steinsaltz kind of explains it as being like a furrow, how long a pair of oxen would be able to like how much space they would be able to plow in a single day or something like that.
Yeah, Rashi says within the area of a land measure equal to half the amount of a furrow of plowing of a pair of oxen plowing a field.
Yeah.
On verse 15, and the ground shook, it was panic sent by God. Although Klein wrote that this refers to an actual earthquake, most commentators take the earth shaking, in Hebrew tirgaz haaretz, to be a metonymy, meaning all the people were shaken out of fear. There's also a parallelism between the first panic, charada, striking the camp, and the second panic sent by God, charadat Elohim. Charadat, yeah. Right. Yeah. On verse 18, the Ark of God. It is not attested elsewhere that the Ark was used to inquire of God. This led some commentators to see the Ark as either the Urim and Thummim, which were in the Ark, according to Rashi, Gersandis, Apravanel, or the Ephod, according to Septuagint, or both, according to Kimchi. Most commentators, modern commentators at least, followed the Septuagint and replaced the Ark with the Ephod. Tsumura, however, writes that the Ephod was already worn by Achia in verse 3, when the Ark was brought near, and so Saul must have asked Achia to inquire of the Lord using the Ephod, before the Ark of God. He writes that Saul's use of the verb bring near hints to his careless attitude toward the Ark of God. Garsiel proposed that the narrator mentions the Ark to remind the readers that Achia, from Eli's family, was with the Ark that was brought to the battlefield. Thus, the narrator wished to create an analogy between the current battle and the Battle of Ebenezer.
I mean, is it possible also that he wanted to use... did they take the Ark into battle with them? So it's like, bring the Ark, let's go, sort of thing? Or
I mean,
would it have stayed in camp?
That's usually how it was taken, right? Because like in their mind, if you have like, you know, your war god by your side, you got a pretty good chance of winning there, at least according to the theology, right? So like I would not be surprised if they were taking the Ark into battle.
Whereas
could be
the god of basket weaving, not so helpful.
Now on verse 19, withdraw your hand. This is usually taken to mean that Saul asked the priest to stop inquiring of God. But Auld notes that nowhere else in the Hebrew Bible do the words take in, asaf, and hand, yad, are connected. He writes, quote, we cannot deduce with any certainty, because of the unique terms in which Saul's instruction is couched, whether the priest is to do what he has been summoned to do, or to stop doing it, end quote. Targum reads, bring near the ephod, seeing the phrase as a second attempt to consult God. This view is attested by Josephus in Antiquity 6, 115. Van Staldein Sulman writes that according to this view, Saul is cleared from the sin of carrying the ark to the battlefield.
But that's just what Dinosaur Man says.
Yeah, exactly. That's how you say it in Dutch, right? On verse 21, yeah. On verse 21, Hebrews. So the Hebrews mentioned here are sometimes taken to be, quote, a people like mercenaries who were fighting with the Philistines, end quote, according to Klein. McCarter writes that the Hebrews, quote unquote, mentioned here are, quote, people of recognized kinship to the followers of Saul, who allied themselves politically with the Philistines. It is easiest to assume that originally they were loyal Israelites who defected to the enemy in times of distress and who now return as the fortunes of war change again, end quote. Now in verses...
So mercenaries.
Yeah, you could say that. Now in verses 23 to 24, so I only included the Septuagint reading of this verse. It reads, and the battle passed through Bamoth, and all the people with Saul were about 10,000 men, and the battle was extended into every town in the hill country of Ephraim, and Saul was ignorant with great ignorance in that day, etc. Yeah. Yeah, I should note that Klein writes that no convincing explanation of how or why this reading was changed to that of the Masoretic text has yet been offered. Yeah. On verse 24, cursed be anyone who eats food before evening comes. Several commentators gave reasons for this curse. Josephus in Antiquity 617, Gersonides, Abravanel, and Garsiel wrote that Saul instructed his people to keep on fighting without stopping for food. Bar-Efrat writes that Saul swears an oath upon his troops to prevent them from making feasts and celebrations. McCarter, followed by Tsumura, writes that Saul attempts to influence Yahweh by a grandiose gesture of self-denial. Klein comments, Saul's expecting his men to refrain from eating calls to mind Yahweh's preference for those soldiers in Gideon's army who lapped up the water instead of kneeling down to drink, seen in Judges 7 verses 4 through 8. The king's desire to use the whole day for gaining vengeance over his enemies resembles Joshua's stopping the sun in the valley of Ayalon until the nation took vengeance on their enemies, Joshua 10:13. A negative note was sounded for Saul in chapter 13 when he was denied dynastic succession. Now even the day of his greatest military victory, filled as it was with his own zeal for Yahweh's war, left him with something less than a completely satisfying outcome because of his errant oath.
You know what? To paraphrase Charlton Heston, your enemies are killed by soldiers, my lord. The strong kill many, the weak kill few, the dead kill none.
Yeah. All right, you can move to the next part of this chapter.
I just I checked just quickly, and even though 4Q Samuel A is really fragmentary, it doesn't look like there was a Tsumura at the end of verse 24 separating it from verse 25.
Oh, interesting.
That's all. Some you know that might mean something, that might not. Some manuscripts, I haven't looked closely enough at 4Q Samuel A, but not all the Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts have paragraph divisions.
I was wondering,
at
like,
all.
I was wondering, like, how close is there, like, a correlation between the Masoretic and the Qumran scrolls in general, and where they put spacings and all?
Depends on the manuscript, right? And there's actually there's some, if you're nerdy and into that stuff, there's actually quite a bit written about the relationships, or even identifying whether something is a petucha or a Tsumura. For the audience, these are the petucha is a open paragraph. It was just open, right?
Yes.
And then the Tsumura is closed, and the Tsumura are the smaller section breaks, the Patucha are the larger section
It's
breaks,
like-
right?
Yeah, it's like a paragraph. It's like a
shift enter.
paragraph break. Like in English, we always put up an extra line between ending of a paragraph and the next paragraph. In the Hebrew, in the Torah scroll, they have two versions. One is more like the English style, which is like the open spacing between two paragraphs, and the other one is closed, where instead of it being an extra line in between, it's just like, oh, we're going to finish this chapter like 2 words into the line, and then we'll have a big space, and then we'll start the next chapter. And it's the next chapter because it's a really big gap.
Yeah.
You don't need to put an extra line in. Yeah.
There's a lot of things going on, and it depends on the manuscript you're dealing with, and it doesn't even seem especially consistent within each manuscript, right? Like there's a lot of things going on. You've got fairly common the scribe will write and come to a break and then just leave the rest of that line empty and start on the next line. That happens quite a bit. That happens, I think, the most often. Other times you have breaks within lines that are about 2 centimeters, maybe as much as an inch. That happens on occasion. And then you have places where, and this is what Tov argues that if a scribe comes to the end of the line and he's really close to the end of the line, but he wants to leave, like he wants to indicate that this is an open paragraph break, he's actually just going to indent the first line of the next following line. So there's a variety of things
do that
going
in
on.
English.
I guess with the Masoretic, by the time of the Masoretic, you would have had like, every time you copy a scroll, you're gonna copy it completely. Like the spaces would be in the same places. The lines would start with the same word, end with the same word. But I'm guessing, earlier on, it would have just been the scribe would have just written it, and then it'd be like, oh, I finished the paragraph at this part of the line. Okay, there's enough space. I'll just start the next paragraph on the same line. Just leave a gap. Otherwise, so it could, it would be random, right?
Yeah, and I'll say one other thing relative to that, right? Like we do have, there are 2 manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're both copies of the Book of Daniel, where it looks like this is like it's one that's copying from the other and is following literally line.
So it's a very old. It's an old thing to copy. Line.
This is so. You're talking about a 1st century BC manuscript and a 1st century CE manuscript. So, but that's it's the only one, right? Like we have multiple copies of lots of books, but no other manuscripts do this. It's just like this one time. So,
wow.
Okay. You ready to continue?
Please. Yes.
Yeah, do you want to start the next bit?
Right. So all the troops came upon a honeycomb, and there was honey on the ground. When the troops came upon the honeycomb, the honey was dripping out, but they did not put their hands to their mouths, for they feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the troops with the oath, so he extended the staff that was in his hand and dipped the tip of it into the honeycomb. And he put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were brightened. Because you know what happens in the Bible when you're told not to eat something, and you eat something, and then your eyes are opened. Then one of his soldiers said,
"It always tastes better when you know it's wrong."
It's funny when you say that, it comes out dirty. Then one of the soldiers says, "Your father strictly charged the troops with an oath, saying, 'Cursed be anyone who eats food this day.' And so the troops are faint." Then Jonathan said, "My father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have brightened because I tasted a little bit of this honey? How much better if today the troops had eaten freely of the spoil taken from their enemies, for now the slaughter among the Philistines has not been great." After they had struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash, from Aijalon, the troops were very faint. So the troops flew upon the spoil and took sheep and oxen and calves and slaughtered them on the ground, and the troops ate them with the blood. Then it was reported to Saul, "Look, The troops are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood. Because that's sometimes allowed in the Bible and sometimes not.
No, it isn't.
It's never allowed, but at this point, they're probably covered head to toe in the blood of their enemies.
Yeah, I think that this is also like,
not the New Testament.
Touche.
Yeah, they're gonna. They're gonna.
Still the Bible, maybe not your Bible.
Not really.
We'll talk about it later. We'll get to this. It's important.
Okay. And he said, "You have dealt treacherously. Roll a large stone before me here." Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the troops and say to them, let all bring their oxen or their sheep and slaughter them here and eat. And do not sin against the Lord by eating it with the blood." What is it supposed to be? Well done? So all the troops brought their oxygen brought their oxygen with them.
See science in the Bible.
Oh,
and science Bible confirmed. I knew this was a science textbook.
And Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Then Saul said, "Let us go down to the Philistines by night and despoil them until the morning light." And well, you want to know what despoiling means, you're going to have to wait till you're a little older and we'll explain that. "Let us not leave one of them," they said. No, they said, "Do whatever seems good to you." But the priest said, "Let us draw near to God here." So Saul inquired of God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel?" But he did not answer him that day. Saul said, "Come here, all you leaders of the people, and let us find out how this sin has arisen today. For as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, even if it is in my son Jonathan, he shall surely die." But there was no one among all the people who answered him. He said to all Israel, "You shall be on one side, and I and my son Jonathan shall be on the other." And the people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you," which is a very polite way of saying, "Whatever, dude." Then Saul said, "O Lord God of Israel, why have you not answered your servant today?" "Because I'm not real. If this guilt in me is, or is it my son Jonathan? O Lord God of Israel, give Urim. But if this guilt is in your people Israel, give Thummim." And Jonathan and Saul were indicated by the lot, but the people were cleared.
Just want to mention this, what Aaron said is from the Septuagint. The Masoretic text has, "Saul then said to the Lord, give Thummim," or show Thummim, Haba Tamim, and then Jonathan and Saul were... Show Tamim, yeah. And Jonathan and Saul were inducted by lot, and truths were clear. But we'll get to that. Just wanted to mention the...
What is the correct pronunciation? Is it Thummim or Thummim?
Well, generally it's Tumim, but here it's Tamim. So another...
The Masoretic not only misses out all of those words, where it says, "Why have you not responded to your servant's day? If this iniquity was due to my son Jonathan or to me, O Lord God of Israel, show Urim. And if you say it was due to your people Israel, show Tumim." So it only had the last two words, show Tumim, but they also changed the pronunciation, the pointing, to instead of being Tumim to Tamim, which could mean
perfect,
perfect or simple.
But
so changing the pronunciation can change the meaning.
Yes.
In Hebrew, Semitic languages are very much like that, where you have like the same letters with different vowels are completely
because you don't have vowels in Hebrew, do you?
You have vowels, we don't write
we
with
do
them.
Okay, we do. It's the nikud that makes the vowels.
Okay, gotcha.
But importantly, there was a time when the consonantal text was the text. So there, and some, you encounter situations where a verb might be a little ambiguous in terms of what it means, because it looks exactly the same. Consonantally, it looks exactly the same, where you could translate it one way or the other.
Yeah.
So
And because the Masoretic text is kind of also like the establishment of this is how each word is pronounced. This is the vowels that go with each word, and therefore it's possible that other earlier versions would have the same letters, but they would have been pronounced differently, and therefore would have been had a slightly different meaning.
So one of the things that we do see within the Dead Sea Scrolls on this question are things called mater lectionis, which is Latin, I think, for the mother of writing.
Yeah, mother of letters. Yeah,
mother of letters. So, and these are vowel letters that are included in the text. Looks like as like an early form of attempting to provide clarity to vocalization of the text. So,
and modern Hebrew uses these longer spellings as well to show, like, to make it easier to understand. And like, yeah, I mean, I think Latin also kind of had that, right? You had letters like U and V, which was just one letter. This looked the same, but sometimes it was consonant, sometimes it was a vowel. So the same with Hebrew, like
you can still see on Latin inscriptions in like the original part of the Royal Ontario Museum, for example, they have Latin words with the V in place of the U, and it is the
and also I. There's no J. I would have been pronounced both y, and I. So like Julius Caesar would have been I.
In Latin,
V. Yeah.
In Latin, Jehovah starts with an I.
I was totally thinking of that.
Oh, where's that from?
That's Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones. Yeah.
And
Well,
Jesus.
and remember
And
that
Jesus.
you can always
Yay.
put the. Well, I mean, they could have just gone with take the top off the ark and lob it at the Philistines and just close your eyes and all their faces melt off. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jesus as well, right? Would have been Jesus with I V.
Yeah. I think we're.
SV, yes.
I think we should move on.
Yeah.
You think?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sometimes I don't think, but now I do.
Then Saul said, "Cast the lot between me and my son Jonathan." And Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said, we're deciding people's fate by flipping a fucking coin.
Because they believe that this was true.
God magic coin.
One more indictment against the Bible. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the tip of my staff." That sounds
Me too.
Yeah. That.
Don't do that, people. If you don't want to get a yeast infection.
You disgusting people.
Oh, okay. Obviously, someone here hasn't tasted some honey with the tip of his staff.
Or the tip of anything.
Yeah.
Now, pardon my ignorance here, and I do know honey does have nutritional value, but can that constitute as food?
Yes.
Just tasting honey?
Well, God is having a
I am
pissy
sugar.
bitch fit and giving them the silent treatment over it. So obviously, I mean, what are the
It's a
proofs you
sugar
need?
rush.
Yeah.
There's that.
Yes.
Okay. So then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done. I've tasted a little honey with the tip of my staff that was in my hand. Here I am. I will die." Saul said, "God, do so to me and more also. You shall surely die, Jonathan." Wow. Then the people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who has accomplished this great victory in Israel? Perish the thought. As the Lord lives, not one hair on his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God today." So the people ransomed Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul withdrew from punishing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. All of this was decided by a coin toss that they decided the coin was wrong.
Philistines are super cooperative fellows, aren't they?
It's nice that the people decided they were finally not going to put up with either God or Saul's shit, since Jonathan had, pretty much single-handedly won the battle for them. So You can both fuck off, you Ponzi bastards.
So God is not omniscient. He can't see what's going to happen in the future. And the coin toss was fucking useless too, because if it doesn't produce what the result you want, you just throw it out. Okay, gotcha. So this is also God determining which side the coin's going to land on. But God had already determined that by what you determined, because he won, so you're happy. So it doesn't matter what the coin says. So the coin wasn't turned by God. Why are you flipping a fucking coin?
Turns out the people have more sense than God.
I mean, the lot was to find out who was guilty. The punishment, I guess, was like up to Saul. And then the people were like, well, Saul, actually, you don't have the power that you think you do.
Well, then why doesn't God ever show up and say, look, what I meant was... But no.
Yeah, I mean, this could be, you could read this as, God showing that he doesn't
give a damn.
that Saul isn't in favor as much, right? God doesn't answer him when he asks him a question, and then Saul wants to kill his son for some reason, and God's like, well, no, because Jonathan is actually, the people like him better than you now.
Actually, there is actually a point to that where, because this military victory, Saul has been trying, obviously, as we note from the previous part we read, Saul has been trying to do things the right way by the book, but he offered the sacrifice himself, and he pissed off Samuel, and now he's in the doghouse, and God's being, pitching a bitch fit. Jonathan just got his ass together, was like, I have faith and I have a sword. I'm gonna go smite. And he did it, and he pretty much won the battle. He, got the enemy all riled up and terrified and turned the tide of the battle single-handedly. And the people are on his side. Now, many a king has ended his reign because his son succeeded him by force. And we see that with David too, how his sons at various times may try to rise up against him for damn good reason, in my opinion. Poor Absalom. But anyway, so there you could absolutely read this as Saul being insecure and using this stupid shit about the honey as an excuse to try and get rid of a son who is the crown prince and clearly far more both effective and popular than him. And the people going, no.
I mean, there's also the bit where he openly declared, like, oh, Saul has made a mistake by not letting you eat. I mean, that's quite rebellious.
He did undermine his father's authority.
Or shall I continue?
Yes.
When Saul had taken the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab and the Ammonites, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he routed them. He did valiantly and struck down the Amalekites and rescued Israel out of the hands of those who plundered them. Now, the sons of Saul were Jonathan, Ishvi, and something unpronounceable,
Malchishua.
And the names of his two daughters were these. The name of the firstborn was Merib, and the name of the younger, Michal.
Yeah, Merav and Michal. Pronouncing an E as I is it, like, I mean, maybe it's more common in English, but like when you have it transliterations, it's never going to be I. It's always going to be E. So Merab.
Okay.
Michal.
Fun fact. I'll just throw this in here now. As far as the archaeological record is concerned, there is no Moab until 9th century, and then and there's no Amalekites until I think like 8th or 7th.
Oh, we have archaeology for the Amalekites? I didn't know that.
It's speculative.
Oh,
but I have to look that up again.
And this would have been like mid 11th century, right? BC.
Yep.
This story. Oh, okay.
I did post an article from I don't know who it was exactly, that claimed that there was an Amalekite rock art, but
Yes,
yeah,
right.
yeah, but he based it on the Numbers 13:29. But the guy is a well-known archaeologist. At least I forgot his name though.
Wasn't Scott Stripling, was it? Here,
Ben
I can
Orthenberg.
actually...
Ben Orthenberg.
Oh, okay. Oh, right.
Yeah,
so...
but
I'll just I can just say this. So Landis and other scholars state that archaeological research has thrown no light on the Amalekites, though some progress has been made in associating specific groups of nomads with archaeological evidence. No recovered data are attributed to Amalek with any degree of certainty. Intensive surveys make it possible to say that the Negev had very little occupation in the late Bronze Age, and that its resettlement began in the early Iron Age, especially in the 11th to early 10th centuries BCE. As Rothenberg suggested, some of the small fortified settlements in the Negev highlands can be linked to the Amalekites. Certain scholars have identified Talmassos as the place called the city of Amalek. Of course, more data must be recovered before such conjectures can be verified.
Oh, but you know that the Amalekites are just part of the sea people.
They are, yes.
Everyone's part of the sea people.
I mean, if we have no solid archaeological evidence for them existing, like the idea that they were Canaanite or that they were, Aegean sea people is like up in the air. It could be either, right? There's no real reason why they should be one or the other, except that there were more Canaanite people in the area than
regionally speaking too, right? Like the way that the Bible describes them geographically, it would seem that whoever was there was not part of.
Oh, they're not on the coast. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
But anyways,
that's fair.
Yeah. Continue, please.
The name of Saul's wife was Anihoem, daughter of Ahimaaz. Well, how's that one? Ahimaaz?
Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz.
Yeah.
Maaz?
Maaz.
Okay. Ahimaaz.
Yeah, like a matzah ball.
Yeah.
It's quite common for women to have names that begin with achi, which means my brother. So
wild.
I don't know if there's a word for that, like name with female names that are my brother is strong, my brother is lively, my brother, and it could either be like, oh, they haven't had a son yet, so they're kind of trying to wish what their son will be like by naming the daughter. So it's like the daughters are so like don't even have, how like there's that rule in literature, like this woman isn't a real character unless she talks about herself. What's it called?
Are you
thinking of the Bechdel test?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So
it's a little different, but okay.
That's
like,
a little different. Where
like
you have two women talking to each other about something other than a man, and they both have to be important enough characters to actually have a name. But this
is even more extreme, where even the woman's name is a reference to a man.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
We were not people except in relation to the men that own us, because this is exactly a reasonable way to deal with women. I'm not going to get stabby over that at all.
Listen, it worked for thousands of years.
Yes, and we had access to beautiful gardens of belladonna and oleander, and we made you delightful teas for thousands of years. It's always good to be a widow.
And the name of the commander of his army was Abner, son of Ner.
The name Avner is literally like
son of Ner, son of
Ner.
Father.
Yeah,
my father.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And Ner can mean candle. So
yeah.
Okay, so Abner, son of Ner, Saul's uncle. Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. And there was hard fighting against the Philistines all the days of Saul. And when Saul saw any strong or valiant warrior, he took him into his service.
Yeah.
He likes those muscly men, does Saul?
They're just arms and legs.
I think he was just trying to keep them away from Jonathan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start on verse 25. The Hebrew Bible. So that's a very interesting verse. I would say this because the Masoretic text, or the Hebrew Bible, reads, "And all the land haaretz came to the Ya'ar, and there was honey upon the face of the field." So several modern commentators take verse 25 to be highly or seriously corrupt. McCarter, following Wellhausen, takes the original reading to be, "And honeycomb was on the ground," etc., or "Now there was honeycomb on the ground," etc. He writes that the noun dvash, honey, was introduced as a marginal gloss to the rare term ya'ar, which means honeycomb, which we'll get to later, and then found its way into the text in its present form. Klein, however, writes that McCarter's reconstruction is not fully convincing, and Tsumura writes that there is no evidence supporting a corruption. He writes that the Masoretic text should be explained with minimal speculation, as we'll later see. Bar-Efrat writes that the verse is spoken from the narrator's point of view, and verse 26 is told from the people's perspective. On the entire army, in Hebrew it's vekol haaretz, all the land. The reading has been understood literally as referring to all the inhabitants of the land by the Septuagint, Targum, and Abravanel. Vulgate reads, "all the common people." Peshita, Kimchi, and Tsumura take the land to refer to the troops, with the latter writing that verse 25 gives information about where rather than who, and so all the land probably refers to the entire area of that district. Septuagint adds that all the land ate the midday meal.
Yeah, and very confusingly, Rashi says that he completely says it's not honey, and he says it's cane sugar.
Sugar cane, yeah.
What
Yeah.
would
Pure
sugar cane be
sugar.
doing there?
No, he just says, which was behold, there was a flow of honey which was flowing from the canes. Oh, sorry, verse 25. Cane sugar grows in the land. Like I don't know why.
I don't think
why
cane
you
sugar
read it.
could necessarily stick to a knife. I mean,
Oh
it's
yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
watery.
I have yeah. It's a bit odd. He says so he calls so in the verse 27 he reads, "into the sugarcane as in, and she placed it in the reeds," in Exodus 2:3, which Onkelos renders, "and she placed it in the Ya'ara." And suf are reeds which grow in the swamp. And similarly, "I ate my sugar cane, ya'ari, with my sugar," in Song of Songs 5:1. And in Arabic, that honey is called sukra in their language, from Rabbi Natan HaIshmaeli, Natan the Ishmaelite.
Okay, so he's saying that the word honey could mean sugar, and maybe he's thinking of the word ya'ar, which you said means honeycomb. Maybe
Yeah,
he thinks
yeah,
that specifically he's saying that specifically refers to sugar cane, and then he's
Yeah.
saying, oh, it's also called honey because even the Arabs call honey sugar. So I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, I have the comment on the woods in Hebrew ya'ar. The word usually denotes a forest and is rendered as such by most early translations: Josephus in Antiquity 618, Kimchi, Abravanel, Bar-Efrat, and Tsumura. But the Septuagint reads, "and Iyar was a wood."
What?
It yeah. It's very odd. Iyar, it transliterates the Ya'ar as a name for the forest.
But it also translates it as forest rather than honeycomb, beehives.
Yeah, I mean, no, it just is. I mean, it takes the next section to be where was it? Septuagint, and honeycomb was on the ground, I think, or I'm not very much sure. But it just says, "and Iyar was a wood," which, yeah.
Okay.
Who says that the Septuagint is the original reading? I have no idea. Yeah. The word also denotes honeycomb in Song of Songs 5:1 and is rendered as such by McCarter, Klein, and Auld. Halot notes the Arabic ari, which means honey, and the Tigrinya ma'ar, which means honeycomb. On verse 27, his eyes brightened. Hebrew vata orena einav. Abravanel writes that Jonathan was so hungry and thirsty that even his light of his eyes, quote unquote, was not with him, in such a way that with this little eating, his vision came back. Likewise, several commentators see his eyes brightened as a sign of renewed vigor, and is found in Psalms 13:4, which is 3 in the Old Testament, and Ezra 9:8. Tsumura writes that physiologically, sugar gives a brightness to the eyes, and that Jonathan probably experienced low blood sugar or hypoglycemia, which can be caused by, quote, vigorous exercise and lack of food, end quote.
Yeah, if you think sugar will bring brightness to your eyes, try cocaine.
Maybe that's what Rusty was getting at. That's what Rusty was getting at with his sugar cane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I should note that in the Teorena, the slides shined in the Ketiv is Teorena, but the Ketiv has no, it's Kerei Teorena, but Ketiv has Tirena, and his eyes saw, which I guess
which is kind of what Aaron was saying right earlier, and his eyes saw.
Yeah, I mean, Kimchi writes that they were dim and dark from the hunger.
Yeah, they used to think that light came out of your eyes, and it's weird. But admittedly, if you've been killing all day, you should probably carbo load. So.
Yeah. Okay, on verse 29, Bar-Efrat writes that Jonathan expresses an explicit and harsh criticism towards his father. He explains via argumentum a fortiori that if he grew stronger by eating a small amount of honey, and so if the people would eat a feast, then they would grow stronger and beat the Philistines harder. Auld comments, Jonathan was not only ignorant of his father's curse, but also scathing about the folly of it once he heard of it. Saul may have wanted to impose some military discipline on a growing band of escaping slaves, while Jonathan knew that an army marches on its stomach. In any case, Jonathan has been fighting for longer in the day than Saul and his men. A rule that has served to keep them in order is rash when applied to him. The term he uses of his father's action, achar, is far from diplomatic. Often, achar is rendered trouble, but that is hardly a strong enough term for the danger caused to Jacob when two of his sons avenged the rape of their sister Dinah in Genesis 34:30, or to Israel by Achar in Joshua 7:25, or to Yiftach, at least as he stated the matter, by his daughter in Judges 11:35. It is dangerous folly on that scale that Saul shares, and accordingly the whole land is in hazard. Yet Jonathan does not appear to consider himself under threat from his father's curse. His eyes have improved as a result of eating honey, and Israel might have fought better if they had eaten something.
Yeah, I was wondering if it seems to be like, I mean, it says also in the Septuagint, when he did a folly that day by making the oath. It seems to be rather that they weren't strong enough, or if only they'd eaten, they'd be stronger. But it also seems to be foreshadowing what happens next, which is because they were so hungry, they ended up, desecrating God's commandment or whatever by eating the meat quickly without draining the blood fully, or according to other opinions, where it means like they hadn't let the bashan or whatever it's called, where they take the blood and put it by the altar or whatever.
I mean, it also seems like it's kind of meant to show once again that Saul just fucking sucks, because if we take like the David story, and I think there's a point where David fasts before a battle or something, but that was but he like did it differently or something. Like it wasn't like this command as to like, oh yeah, no one can eat or something.
When
like
he
that,
took
right?
Jerusalem, he said he was thirsty, and a group of men risked their lives to bring him water, but he wouldn't drink it and poured it out as an offering to the Lord, because this is the blood of these noble men who risked their lives that I could have a drink. That's the only thing I
really
can
don't
think of.
remember. Yeah, but I do remember something about him not not eating or drinking beforehand.
Right, but he would have eaten. He probably would have maybe he had fasted during the day, but then as soon as he had a battle, he would have had some spoils. And Saul is different because he says no one shall eat until the night.
Right, exactly. So he takes it to this point where it's now just stupid entirely.
And
so once again, like kind of paralleling that, like, oh, like look how great David is, especially compared to this Saul bozo.
And Jonathan admittedly calls his father a dumbass, which, you know, as you put it, not exactly diplomatically. So if your father is king, don't call him a dumbass, even when he's being a total dumbass.
Yeah. Now on verse 32, ate them together with the blood. The Hebrew Bible reads, Vayochal ha'am al hadam. The word al is taken here to mean with, as seen in Genesis 32:12 and Exodus 12:8, although it is usually understood to mean over or upon, a reading which McCarter notes some accept, like Herzberg and Stobe, but writes that it is incorrect since it diminishes the crime. Several passages in the Torah prohibit eating blood, as we see in Genesis 9:4, Leviticus 17:11, and Deuteronomy 12:23. Probably because people attributed magical abilities to it, according to Bar-Efrat. Kimchi and Ditrani explained that they were slaughtering the meat on the ground, which caused the blood to be absorbed into the flesh. Gersonides and Abravanel, however, wrote that the troops ate the flesh on the spot where the blood was spilled, because the Gentiles used blood for divination. Auld writes that this interpretation understands that eating over the blood, especially at night, represents a form of communication with the forces of the underworld.
Yeah, there is also a place, I think, in Leviticus where it says, like, do not have my sacrifice on the blood. And that's like problematic because it's like, well, blood is already forbidden to eat. Why would you need an explicit commandment to say,
but
like,
also blood is involved in the sacrifice because you sprinkle the blood on a whole bunch of rituals, and it's very
but it's like you shouldn't eat the sacrifice. You shouldn't eat the so they explain it as like you shouldn't eat the sacrifice before the blood is spilt in, like, as part of the service, and then so if the same language is used here, then they kind of would also explain this bit as saying a similar thing. Like, it's not necessarily they eat the blood in the flesh, but like they should have sacrificed a bit. And that's why the next bit where Saul sets up an altar and says, come, slaughter, sacrifice, do the service, then you can eat.
Do it properly. Well, and at least with these interpretations, they're not committing the most heinous sin with steak, which is cooking it well done.
That's the only way to eat it
Dishonor.
without the blood.
I don't care. Don't you dare do that to good steak.
Is it what's in view here? I once went to wild boar hunting with an expert, and when we brought back the kill, one of the first things he did is he hung it and then opened up an artery and let it drain. Took maybe a couple hours or something like that, and then he filleted the thing and prepared everything for us to take home and whatnot. And so is that maybe what's in view here? Is that the blood from the arteries that has to be drained out before you cut into it and cook it?
But yeah, so like, well, kosher slaughter is a bit more than that. Like, I mean, and maybe back then, you know, it might have just been, you know, let it drip, as you say. But I think everyone does that, the minimum, because it doesn't taste good to have too much blood. But like kosher rules go a bit further, and like you have to let the blood drip, and then each piece of meat needs to be salted and then let out and rinsed. Actually, I think it's rinsing, salting, rinsing. And like certain organs, for example, like there's so much blood in them that you can't eat them unless you like roast them until they're like completely over. Like liver, for example, you have to roast it over a flame to get the blood out.
Oh.
On verse 33, roll a large stone over here at once. Kimchi and Ditrani explain that the stone is used to drain the blood from the meat, so that the two won't mix. Kara, however, wrote that the large stone is used as an altar for the sprinkling of the blood, as we see in Leviticus 17, verses 3 to 11. While McCarter and Tsumura favor Kimchi and Ditrani's interpretation, Klein follows Kara and writes, quote, it was on the altar that the blood belonged according to the regulations of the Holiness Code, seen Leviticus 17, verses 6 and 11. It is only in Deuteronomistic legislation that secular slaughter was permitted, provided that the animal's blood was poured out on the ground, Deuteronomy 12, verses 15 to 24. But the account in verses 31 to 35 is older than Deuteronomy, since Saul's building of an altar in verse 35 is related without any trace of criticism. Compare Samuel's altar in 1 Samuel 7:17. The writer notes that this was Saul's first altar. We can assume that tradition remembered others which could be attributed to his hand. On verse 35, Saul built an altar to the Lord. Kara wrote that the large stone was the altar. Gersonides wrote that the rolling of the large stone was the first step of building the altar. After Saul was done with the war, he returned to build the altar. Tsumura notes R.P. Gordon's view that the note regarding the altar being the first one that Saul built is slightly reproachful. He writes, quote, "It may be that the author emphasizes that this was Saul's first serious attempt to worship the Lord, though he had been rejected as king in the Lord's sight." On
the
verse
Lord
30,
is a fickle bitch.
I guess. On verse 39, even if the guilt lies with my son Jonathan, he must die. Tsumura notes that some scholars, like Keith W. Whitelam, think that Saul was trying to procure Jonathan's death with this oath. He writes, however, that the narrator keeps a complete silence here. Auld comments, Saul's statement of the situation is open to different readings. Is stating the extreme case a neutral indication that no favor will be shown, that everyone's life is on the line? Why then is his own life not stated as the extreme case? Or does he already know that Jonathan has eaten and has deplored his father's curse? And is he content to be rid of a son who takes matters into his own hands, however successfully? Does he wonder whether Jonathan is the one whom Yahweh has already selected to replace him in 1314? Is it for such reasons that he needs his leaders to witness the divine response?
Exactly. Although, what would be the problem? Because if your son succeeds you, that's success as a king. That's why you had sons.
Yeah, and also the curse was like your family won't inherit. Like you won't.
Yeah.
Like,
Maybe he was gone a lot. Maybe he thought.
On verse 41, give a perfect lot. I'm reading the KJV. In Hebrew, it's hava tamim. The exact meaning of this phrase is unclear. The word tamim usually means complete or perfect, but also truth. Thus, halot provides 4 possible translations. A, make a correct decision. B, give a complete answer. C, make it completely clear. And D, do make the truth known. Septuagint reads, "And Saul said, O Lord God of Israel, why is it that you have not answered your slave today? If this guilt is in me or in my son Jonathan, O Lord God of Israel, give clear ones, and if this is what you say, in your people Israel, give now holiness." End quote. Several commentators like McCarter, Klein, and Bar-Efrat prefer the Septuagint reading, with McCarter explaining that the Masoretic text has suffered a long haplography caused by homo eoteleuton, where a scribe's eye skipped from LeYisra'el, that preceded Lama, why, to the Israel that preceded Havatamim, with only Havatamim remaining. Tsumura, however, argued that the present narrative purposefully gives an abbreviated explanation of the procedure of lot casting, since the audience was familiar with the practice. He wrote that Tamim is equivalent to the Thumim, an interpretation already given by Ibn Kaspi. While Halot notes both the Masoretic text and the Septuagint reading, it reads, quote, "We are not able to reach the decision about which of the solutions proposed in the Masoretic text and the Septuagint to accept." No. Nobody knows.
yeah, I mean, it makes sense that the Septuagint is showing an original reading. I mean, it makes the fact that the Masoretic is like God of Israel, and then skips to show Thummim, and the Septuagint has like a whole bit which ends with your people Israel, show Thummim. It shows like it's more or less like the word Israel might be at the end of the line or whatever, and then they kind of skip the line out. It makes a lot of sense. And then they were like, "Oh, why is Thummim by itself? That doesn't make any sense." So they changed it to Thummim.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. On verse 44, God do so and more also. I'm reading the KJV again. In Hebrew, it's Ko Yaseh Elohim V'Ko Yosif, which is, I mean, but the Septuagint, Vulgate, and Peshitta, and several Hebrew and Targum manuscripts read Ko ya'aseh Elohim li, which means, may God do this to me. This meaning is favored by traditional commentators like Kimchi and Litrani and most modern commentators. McCarter notes Driver's opinion that to me might have been understood, but originally was unexpressed and supplied secondarily in the traditions that display it. Tsumura retains the MT, noting the appearance of the expression in 317 and 2013. On verse 45, the men rescued Jonathan. Hebrew for rescued is vayifdu, from the root pei dalet hey. Kara wrote that the people rescued, quote-unquote, Jonathan with their words, saying, the oath does not apply to him because he did not hear his father swearing the land. Gersonides notes that in Psalms 55:19 and Isaiah 51:11, the root pei dalet hey denotes rescuing. Bar-Efrat, however, writes that the root's literal meaning is releasing something for money or other valuable thing. Thus, it seems that the troops redeemed Jonathan with money or with a sacrifice to God, as we see in Midrash Shmuel 17 as well. Klein notes that others, like Bud, Ewald, and Wellhausen, suggested another man as a substitute. Septuagint reads, and the people prayed for Jonathan, reading Vayitpalelu instead of Vayifdu. Josephus in Antiquity 6:1-8 combined both readings. Quote, they liberated him from his father's curse and made prayers to God. Okay. Now on verse 47, he fought against Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah. Klein comments, since there are no biblical records of his clashes with Moab, Edom, and the king of Zobah, many scholars believe that these countries have been supplied from the list of nations against whom David fought in 2 Samuel 8. The Lucianic recension, which adds Beth Rehob to the list of enemies, seems to result from just such a comparison. Which adds Beth Rehob to the list of enemies, seems to result from just such a comparison with the list of David's battles. Because Saul was not in fact victorious wherever he turned, some, for example Birch, believe that verses 47-51 were added before chapters 13 and 14 were linked to chapters 15 forward. But D.H., the Deuteronomistic historian, may have wanted to indicate that before kingship was removed from Saul in chapters 15-16, he was an adequate savior figure, just as David is recorded to have been in 2 Samuel 8 verses 6-14. On verse 49, according to this verse, Saul's sons were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. However, according to 31:2, his sons were Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. And 1 Chronicles 8:33 and 9:39 list Jonathan, Malchishua, Abinadab, and Eshbaal as Saul's sons. Abinadab is not mentioned in verse 49. Kimchi wrote that Ishvi is Abinadab. Some modern commentators see Ishvi as a variant of the form Ishbosheth, reading Ishvi as Ishio, man of Yahweh, which McCarter writes is an, quote, official theologically correct variation of Ishbaal or Eshbaal, man of Baal, end quote. Tsumura, however, writes that as there is no textual evidence for Ish here, this remains a speculation, and so this leaves out Abinadab. He adds that if Ishvi is neither Ishbaal or Abinadab, this account leaves out two known sons and puts in an unknown one. Septuagint reads Yesiol, something like that, Yesiol. Auld notes Finkel's opinion that this is a corruption of the nickname Yishai Od, another Jesse, another Yishai. He reports that the space in 4 Samuel A requires a longer name and restores, quote-unquote, Aminadab from the Septuagint reading of 1 Samuel 31:2. Yeah. And finally, on verse 50, Avner, son of Ner, and Ner was Saul's uncle. The Hebrew Bible reads, Abner, son of Ner, uncle of Saul. It is unclear if Saul's uncle was Abner or Ner. McCarter writes that if Abner was Saul's uncle, then Ner was his grandfather, which contradicts 9:1, where Saul's grandfather is identified as Abiel. Thus, he writes that it is likely that Ner was Saul's uncle, as reported as a reading supported by 1 Chronicles 9:36, where Ner and Kish are brothers, and is favored by Josephus in Antiquity 6:130 and Rashi. However, Ner is said to have been Kish's father in 1 Chronicles 8:33 and 9:39. He writes, quote, "Until a better solution is proposed, we must assume that this was an error on the chronicler's part, arising perhaps from misinterpretation of the information given in the present passage." End quote. Tsumura proposed that Kish in 1 Chronicles 9:36 and Kish in 1 Chronicles 9:39 are different persons.
I don't know. I could see Abner being Saul's cousin. That would explain, because he was his loyal general for the entirety of his reign and championed his son in succession until his son was a dumbass, and Abner was like, "Fuck it, I'm out." But yeah, there was a lifelong loyalty there to Saul and to his reign, so a family tie would explain that potentially.
Yeah, I should finish with some Christian commentators. So
Please.
Gregory the Great writes that the people seizing and eating of the spoils of war represents the thoughts and actions of the arrogant who exult in carnal pleasures.
Oh my God. I'm hungry after not eating all day. I'm a dirty sinner of carnal pleasures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bede writes that the Israelites' eating of bloody meat typifies lazy teachers who fail to draw catechists away from earthly and fleshy allurements. Yeah. And
More for me.
yes. Yeah. And Maximus of Turin writes that as Saul overcame his enemies through abstinence, so Christians must avoid the honey of the pleasures and vices of the world.
Okay, so we're all still on for the orgy this afternoon?
Yeah, I got it written down on my calendar here.
Okay, good.
Okay, so we got a final comment here. DBK says, as I understand the narratives, they were supposed to be led by the priests and the Sanhedrin, but the people supposedly demanded a king.
Well,
No Sanhedrin.
No,
Yeah,
Sanhedrin.
definitely no Sanhedrin. But they were like, the way that it's presented is like, oh, you were supposed to be led by God. But
God.
if you want a king. Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
Who
Yeah.
incidentally
All right.
fucked up leadership so badly, he incited multiple internal genocides. So great job there, God.
Okay. So book 1, Samuel 15 will be next week.
Yes.
Oh, that one's
Don't
fun.
forget, everybody, to join the Discord
Yeah.
where Lawrence is.
And I'm there.
Aaron. Aaron is there as well.
Symbolically, or
Actually, I'm pretty sure everyone here is in the Discord. Actually, Mark, are you?
yes,
Yes.
he
Okay.
is. Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Then yeah, everyone here is in the Discord. So if you want to annoy everybody here, please join the Discord.
Please annoy me. Please annoy me. I would happy to be annoyed.
Yeah.
I want to annoy Dr. Kip.
I'm
Oh,
only
well.
in one place on the Discord.
The Bible stuff, because yes.
He's usually actually in meme stuff. That's his normal place.
I was gonna say
I love memes.
I was gonna say I'm mostly active in the meme stuff, but food stuff as well.
Yeah.
I would like to invite folks to my channel, Apostate of Mind, where we just released a recent episode with Dr. Kip Davis, where he does a
that?
critical commentary of Genesis 3:15, a passage often interpreted by Christians to be the first gospel.
Proto-Evangelion.
That's right.
Oh,
Oh,
Link to
uh,
that
Actually, I'm pretty sure
channel.
the Proto Evangelion is the one from Thomas. It's that one actually.
I think.
Yeah,
I
I didn't
Wait, I
know
don't know.
about,
I
I
don't know
didn't know
enough
about this
anime.
show. I need to check that one out.
Link to that channel
think-
is in the chat.
Thank you.
I think I have a commentary by Westerman or Carr that basically say that that Proto-Evangelion is nonsense.
Yeah, of course it is.
I mean, it's one of the most popular animes out there.
Not that one. The
No, that's not Proto,
Neo-Evangelion.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah. I guess the proto one wasn't as good.
Okay. In the meantime, I'm gonna go take him for walkies.
Your snake?
Aw.
Yeah.
You walk?
Yeah,
your
he needs
snake?
a walk. That's exactly what a snake needs, is a walk.
I think
Well,
we should.
Aaron's
sometimes
gonna
I
go have
take
a
him to the
sliver.
dog park, you know,
Wait.
because it's cheaper to feed him that way.
Excellent.
Well, don't you know snakes eat dust?
Yeah.
Of all the
Super
days.
easy to feed, I'm sure. Right? You just pour,
Yes.
you just vacuum and empty the bag into your snake,
Yes.
your terrariums.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see you next week.
I think we should end with don't forget to tune in next week as Father Arn reads more bedtime stories from the exciting adventures of Holly Bibble.
I saw this beautiful thing about Dora the Explorer it was on YouTube. Dora the Explorer smuggling cocaine from South America.
Yeah,
Was
really good. Really
so
good
funny.
Yeah, that
What,
sounds
is
perfect.
is that on YouTube?
It's so funny, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Timer, no swiping.
See
Can
the
you
Discord
say
for more.
cocaina?
I'm looking that
Yeah.
up right now.
All
I
right.
bet her eyes were enlightened.
See you all next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.